Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ENTSO-E Conference 2021, entitled Net Zero, an Energy System for a Climate-Neutral Continent by 2050. My name is Sonja Tuhig, and I am the Secretary General of ENTSO-E. I am joined today by our Chair of our Board, Joachim van Zetten, and by our Vice President, Spinnik Boldest. Good morning to you, Joachim and Spinnik. They will moderate sessions this morning, and also will be joined by our Vice Chair of our Board, Liam Ryan, who will join us from Dublin. We will also hear from our esteemed President, Hervé Lafay, who will join us from Paris. Today's conference is an opportunity for ENTSO-E to affirm its commitment to the energy transition and a climate-neutral continent by 2050. At the beginning of this year, ENTSO-E affirmed its commitment itself by reviewing its mission statement in order to foster cooperation for its members for a greener, more reliable and cost-efficient power system. Our conference just takes place after COP26, and of course 2021 has been a very interesting year with the launch of the Fit for 55 package and also the review of the 10E regulation. I am, of course, also mindful, and all of us are, of the context of the pandemic right now. And, of course, the importance of the energy system has been highlighted on the public stage. Our discussion today will focus on three ingredients. The first, large-scale energy deployment offshore. The second is energy system integration. And the third is demand-side flexibility. Our moderators will be joined by very important panelists and key from our stakeholders. And of course, we will have keynote speeches. The first, a video address by the Secretary of State for Energy for the Slovenian Presidency, and also by the Energy Commissioner, Ms. Kadri Simpson. So, without further ado, I will first talk about the poll that we have, and on the screen, as you see here this morning, we have a chat. So please do enter your opinion in the chat. We are very much interested in our audience's questions today, and of course, we want a very exhilarating debate. We also have a poll that's undertaken throughout the morning, so please feel free to complete the poll, and at the end of our conference, we will talk with Joachim van Zetten with regard to what the poll says in terms of trends for 2050. So, without further ado, I now would like to launch our conference. I wish you the very best this morning and enjoy this conference. And the first is our video address by the Secretary of State for the Slovenian Presidency, Mr. Košorok. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to greet participants of the Transmission System Operator ENTSO-E Conference. I was not able to join live because of the SET-Plan conference, where I'm contributing to the high-level session on the future of SET-Plan, taking actually at the same time. The COVID-19 crisis has strengthened our will for more independent Europe in strategic fields, be it in food supply, the supply of medicines, vaccines and medical equipment, semiconductors, and of course energy. In the beginning of the crisis, it was not clear yet, but now we know that COVID-19 hasn't endangered the security supply of the electricity. It has nevertheless shaken the economy. After the fall, we have a rise, and swing has influenced also the energy market, including energy. Now we are even more determined that the green transition, it is the correct direction, bringing us not only the climate neutrality, but also more independence and resilience regarding extraordinary events like pandemic. It also should not move us out of the market orientation. The single European electricity market has already proved to be most effective even in difficult situations. Secure and reliable supply of electricity is urgent for competitive economy. Due to the green transition, electricity supply is going to prevail in the energy sector. In this process, ENTSO-E has a key role. Slovenian Presidency, also due to ELE's action, has a good overview on the work on ENTSO-E, in particular in the relations to the fields of system development, system operation, markets, and research and innovation. All these areas will contribute many key ingredients to the transition to a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. The power industry has a profound reputation in keeping stability and developing the power system according to the consumer needs. However, the challenges, and with them the changes that we'll need in the next 5 to 10 years, should increase our alertness, and frankly, we will never get back to anywhere near the comfort zone. Radically rebuilding the power system will be the key enabler of the climate-neutral Europe, and all visions, targets, processes, and actions should be revised. The design of the new power system will need to be upgraded, as well as tailored to integrate and coexist with the clean gas, heating, and the transport sector. Many of these sectors are not organized in a such high-level fashion that the power system, therefore, ENTSO-E will have to actively follow the challenges outside its core perimeter, and either through its core organization or through the individual transmission system operator to actively engage where a holistically optimization across the energy infrastructure will be necessary. Slovenian Presidency paid special attention to the Western Balkans to ensure continuation and of the enlargement process with the Western Balkans countries. Regarding these countries, ENTSO-E is a forerunner. TSOs from this area are already members of ENTSO-E. EU electricity market works across borders of the European Union. ENTSO-E should be given a special credit for that, and also initiative for further endeavor to full incorporation of electricity markets in the Western Balkans into a single European electricity market. So finally, let me express a wish for the further successful endeavor towards transition to a climate neutrality. I wish you all the best.
Thank you to State Secretary Kosharak for these very inspiring words. We now move to our address from the Energy Commissioner, Ms. Kadri Simpson. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, participants to the ENTSO-E Annual Conference. I am very grateful for the opportunity to take part in this event, even if not in person. Thank you for putting the climate neutrality target on top of your agenda, and I am delighted to share my thoughts in the discussion that leads to your very own vision for 2050. Earlier this autumn, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that, despite all efforts, global greenhouse gas emissions trends can lead to a temperature rise of about 2.7 degrees by the end of the century. Today, we can be cautiously optimistic that if all long-term commitments announced in Glasgow will be implemented, we should keep global warming under 2 degrees. But this also means that a lot of work is left for next year's climate conference in Egypt in order to put us on track for 1.5 degrees. My contribution to the COP26 was to underline the importance of offshore energy and hydrogen developments, but also the need for a just transition. Energy is indeed key in the context of EU's higher climate ambition, because reaching our Green Deal goals will not be possible without reshaping our entire energy system. Change must happen here first for decarbonization to ripple across all sectors. There is no path to net zero that doesn't demand shift action on renewable energy and energy efficiency. For 2030, we have proposed new headline targets of 40% renewable energy in the primary energy consumption and 9% less energy consumed compared to projections. Our renewables and energy efficiency proposals in the Fit for 55 package are as bold as they are necessary. We set out for more ambition, more action, and more investment. Beyond the targets we are setting, the enablers we need for a decade of clean energy transition. But despite the existing and proposed EU law, there is a growing anxiety that delays in deploying renewables at the pace and scale needed could jeopardize the EU capacity to reach its targets. One reason for this is the duration of permitting and authorization procedures. It takes on average 6 to 7 years to conclude the permitting process on a new offshore wind park. We have already engaged to understand better the procedural difficulties faced by member states when issuing permits for renewables projects. And we will continue this work until next year and provide you with a guidance on the best practices to follow for reconciling renewables deployment and for environment and local communities. But looking at the way member states grant permits is only one side of the coin. We also need to boost investments and facilitate power purchase agreements and promote cross-border cooperation. There are also some outstanding elements that will be addressed in other forthcoming legislative proposals. Above all, we are finalizing the work to propose a set of complementary rules in the hydrogen and decarbonized gas market package planned for adoption in December. It will not deliver decarbonization in itself, but it will remove barriers and ensure that the right market framework is in place for this to happen in the most cost-efficient manner. Altogether, the EU regulatory framework on energy needs to facilitate massive investment. We will need investments in the range of 14 billion per year for solar PV and 35 billion for wind. We are looking at 61 billion per year for grid expansions. And for electrolyzers, we expect 40 billion euros of investment over the period 2021-2030. We do have positive signals as member states have high ambition, as shown in the recovery and resilience plans, backed by significant investment support from the EU. And we are seeing amazing progress on the ground. In 2020, renewable power generation overtook fossil fuels in the EU, and wind and solar PV now account for 20% of power generation, compared to 13% from coal-fired power stations. But at the same time, we also need to realize that the global economy, including energy sector, came out of a very difficult year. The State of the Energy Union 2021, which was recently published, shows that additional capacity of renewables in 2020 was only marginally greater than the previous year. As I was mentioning just transition, I would like to talk about the fast rise in energy prices that we have witnessed over the last month. A combination of factors is driving this global trend, but there is a clear connection to today's conference. Rising energy prices show that delivering clean and affordable energy really matters for the consumers. The price increase is led by growing prices for imported fossil fuels. Our dependency from fossil fuels, 90% of the gas we use is imported, shows that the transition to clean energy is not only vital for our planet, it is also crucial for our economy and for the resilience to energy price shocks. Our aims to decarbonize the economy and shift away to greener and renewable energy are not the cause but the solution to the affordability challenge in the long run. It is a paradox that despite all our efforts, the EU energy import dependency has actually increased over the last 10 years. It reached 60.6% in 2019, the highest level in the past 30 years. We need to become more independent from fossil fuels and their imports and make renewable energy and energy efficiency a success. Investing in renewables, the cheapest source of electricity production, is Europe's best guarantee for secure and affordable energy supply. At the same time, it is very clear that volatile energy prices point towards the need for demand-side flexibility. And energy efficiency first principle helps us in finding an optimal investment strategy for the transition. We also see that an integrated EU energy market is the most cost-effective way for this transition. It keeps prices in check by creating competition and allows consumers to choose energy suppliers. Well interconnected member states have been clearly less affected by the soaring prices. That is why I believe reforming the 10E regulation and boosting our cross-border infrastructure policy is also key in supporting the energy transition and in keeping the prices down. I look forward to concluding the legislative work on the proposal under the Slovenian presidency, but without sacrificing the ambition of the proposal. I wish you a great conference experience, and I very much look forward to the outcomes of your discussions on system operators' vision for 2050. The change, even in that long perspective, starts today.
Thank you to Commissioner Simpson for sharing these very important messages on the energy transition and meeting Europe's climate ambitions. We are now joined live from Paris by our esteemed president, Hervé Lafay, who will say a few words on behalf of the association. Good morning, Hervé.
In Paris. Firstly, I want to warmly thank the Commissioner Kadri Simpson and the Slovenian State Secretary of Energy, Mr. Blasko Sorok, for their speeches, which gave us the big picture, and also for the kind words towards the association. As you are certainly well aware of, ENTSO-E is a professional association for the cooperation of pan-European electricity system operators, which goes beyond the European Union borders, with more than 40 members coming from more than 30 countries. And as mentioned by Mr. Kosorok, we have inherited from decades of a history of cross-border operational cooperation, which is key to ensure the security of supply. And we have so far been able to go successfully through the COVID crisis, as risk preparedness is one of the core expertise of the association and its members. And this must make us both confident in our ability to tackle future challenges brought by the energy transition, and humble, since the main learning is that what was unimaginable happens and requires innovative actions and decisions. And I will insist on the fact that this unprecedented transition is coming with a magnitude and the speed that we have never known in previous episodes. This in the context of a growing criticality of electricity in the future, with a foreseen increase in use uses and the growing societal expectations in terms of resilience and affordability as well. Maybe sometimes we might appear as the bad guys, insisting on threats and mitigation measures. Let us be clear about that. Our only goal here is certainly not to stop or oppose the transition, but on the contrary, to ensure to make the desired future possible, and this down to every second up to the year 2050 and beyond. Networks, cooperation, and solidarity, these are the key concepts and values driving our activities that cover from research and innovation, system development, market, up to operation. And in my eyes, also by comparing to other regions or continents in the world, my feeling is that we can be proud of what we have accomplished so far. Of course, and this annual conference will be dedicated to that, the road is still long and difficult to reach the objective for 2050 and beyond, and it will require significant efforts for the association and its members. And for that, we have the guidance of our mission and vision paper, focused on terms that we believe will remain completely relevant: ensuring the security of supply, enable market integration, or at least market interconnection, integrate the tremendous changes we expect on energy connected actors. The generation mix, of course, with a surge of renewables, and the consumption as well. The consumption evolution trends named end users electrification, flexibility. ENTSO-E is committed to serve as a platform for its members, firstly, to develop solutions to tackle these energy system challenges. Our deliverables, such as the new 10-year system adequacy assessment with an enhanced modeling, are built with transparency and through consultations, and are also tools for the community of stakeholders in order to help enlighten the future and for the decision makers to shape it. And I'm glad that Commissioner Simpson has mentioned the enormous investment expenses, particularly for the grid development and adaptation, and the challenge of acceptability that we are constantly facing. In that sense, and the 10-year network development planning produced by ENTSO-E gives concrete elements, my wish is that these challenges are not only expressed in financial or euro terms, but also in terms of kilometers of lines to be built or to be reinforced, in number of substations, of new substations, so that the public parties involved understand that the climate change challenges for the energy system are requiring a new, or at least a profoundly transformed infrastructure. And what is obvious for offshore development, which is of course new connections, must also be explained for the transcontinental, I would say, new flows to come, and the connected infrastructure to reinforce or to rebuild. The recent COP26 was also mentioned, and it has reminded also us that the challenges are planetary. There are initiatives such as One Sun, One World, One Grid, which are pushing to the extreme the key elements of the common declaration we had at COP26 together with MET-TSO, which is the association of the TSOs for the Mediterranean Ring, and Go15, which gathers the largest operators in the world, to stress the importance of interconnection and cross-border cooperation to enable solidarity between countries. So we will have also to keep an eye on the possible extension of our interconnection to the neighboring regions or continents, such as Africa, in the coming decade. As Sonia just said, this conference will highlight three key ingredients for this climate neutral energy system: offshore, system integration, and flexibility. But there are far more aspects that the Vision 2050 we are presenting will be exploring. This, Sonia, let me take this opportunity to have perhaps some more personal words, hoping not to be boring. And I want to share with you another conviction about the role and the added value of network in general and the electricity network for these changes in the future. The network is a way to connect and grab the benefits brought by the connection while respecting diversity, geographical diversity first of all, but also technological, economical, political, and so on. And I think it is important that we, with regard to sustainability and resilience, we keep in mind that we have to be careful by keeping the balance between this diversity and the needed standardization to have this connection through the networks. With that, I will now close my speech by thanking all of you for attending this conference and showing your interest in the association, and by wishing you an instructive conference. And I am looking forward for the debates to come and the great discussions. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Hervé, for your very interesting words and important points on cross-border cooperation and solidarity amongst countries. Also, the personal touch is very nice and very important to hear your own convictions. I now start our first panel discussion and welcome on stage here with me today Joachim van Zetten. Good morning, Joachim.
Good morning, Sonia.
We're ready to hear a great debate, I hope. You think?
Yeah, I hope so.
On integrating renewable offshore energy. A great discussion is to be had, and I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you for these introductions and for the pre-speakers. Yeah, may I introduce myself? My name is Joachim van Zetten. I'm chair of the board of ENTSO-E. I'm very honored to be here today and to guide you through the first panel. In the first session, we are going to analyze challenges, threats, opportunities of the development of the large-scale offshore wind grids. And this is part, of course, of the European deal, of the climate change deal, to reach climate neutrality until 2050. To give you an example for what's going on, from my home country where I come from Germany, we are going to switch off power plants of 6,500 megawatt at the end of the year. So, in my opinion, we are completely in the process of, the transition to the climate neutrality energy production. In Europe, and that is one of the goals of the European Union's energy policy, we will have to install 300 gigawatt offshore wind energy until 2050. And that is desperately needed, as we heard, because the mothballing and the switching off of coal-fired power plants, of lignite-fired power plants, of gas-fired power plants is going on and will continue and increase. ENTSO-E already considered what's going on with the offshore grids and what is needed for developing an offshore grid, for planning offshore grids, for interoperability of offshore grids, and also for operating offshore grids and building offshore platforms under an environmental neutral way. Therefore, ENTSO-E already has published 5 so-called position papers and 1 umbrella paper, which you can see and download on our ENTSO-E website. One is dealing with system development of offshore grids, one is with the cooperation and interoperability, one is with market design, one is with system operation and the governance for that, and one is with the needed investments. So all these papers are freely to be downloaded on our web page. Before we stick into the discussion and also in the questions you might have also, I would like to start with a keynote speech, and we have a distinguished speaker in the first session, and that is Mr. Morten Helvig Pedersen. Mr. Morten Helvig Pedersen is member of the European Parliament, and he is rapporteur of the European Parliament's Offshore Renewable Energy Strategy. Warm welcome to you, Mr. Pedersen, and the floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you so much, Joachim. Thanks for the invitation and thanks for the applause. It's always good to have an applause, especially prior to having said a single word. I'm not sure you applaud me when I finish. So thanks for this. And thank you so much for organizing this great event. I think it is such a timely event and so important topics that are on the agenda. So it's a big privilege for me to be with you. I returned from Glasgow and the climate summit, and as we all know, there were good things and bad things in this summit, and obviously the paradox is that the summit ends in a big fight on whether to phase out or phase down coal, the use of coal, whereas when talking about renewables and offshore, our challenge is how to phase in and the speed and sense of urgency in phasing in offshore renewables and renewables in general. I have the pleasure of being rapporteur in European Parliament's work with the offshore renewable energies, and we are actually finalizing this dossier. Right now, we'll be voting on this file next week in the Industry and Energy Committee, where I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as Vice President. And I can tell you that there's a broad majority supporting this file, this text, when we'll have the votes in next week. And let me just go into some substance of what's on the table in terms of this file. Seems to me that we are talking about not least three very broad categories of issues when discussing the integration of offshore renewables. There's the infrastructural discussions. We have discussions on market design. And we have discussions, not least on the difficult issue of permitting. And if you allow me, I'll touch just briefly on these issues. Now, in the report, we stress the urgent need to improve and expand existing infrastructure. Obviously, in order to meet the increased electricity production and flows from offshore to inland-based consumers. And there is an urgent need for member states to increase collaboration on this issue to maximize effective use of the available resources. We furthermore encourage the EU and the member states to support research and development of multi-purpose interconnectors. And we call on the Commission to assist manufacturers of different equipment to develop a common standard that can ensure compatibility and interoperability among interconnectors. And clearly, this is a very difficult task in terms of all the technical issues and obviously also financial issues that will have to rely heavily on a lot of support schemes provided by the European Union and the markets eventually. Secondly, market design issues. Obviously, we need a properly functioning EU electricity market, and we need to eliminate artificial trade barriers and fixed prices and subsidies and other market distorting measures that prevent the successful integration of renewables. Therefore, we need also to review existing regulatory frameworks in order to identify barriers. We need to look on bidding zone configurations. We need to look at infrastructure and transmission regulation that should be based and founded on unbundling rules with clearly defined separation of roles and responsibilities, third-party access, and transparent tariffs. And then finally, the third category, which seems to me to be perhaps the most difficult issue, namely the issue of permitting. We invite Commission and member states to consider introducing time limits for the various procedural administrative steps. And we recommend introduction of time limits for authorization of permits when fully complete dossiers have been provided, as well as deadlines for decisions to be introduced. And I can tell you this was perhaps the most challenging part of the political work in this report, given that permitting is such a sensitive issue. It's a prerogative of member states, but clearly we have to acknowledge that if we are to fulfill our visions and ambitions for 2030 and going beyond, then we have to simply do things differently that we've managed to do so far. And if not, we will not succeed in achieving our climate goals if we do not address this issue of permitting in a different way. Furthermore, we have entire processes related to maritime spatial planning. These processes are not necessarily aligned or coordinated with the permitting issue in general. So at least we have to ensure that we have coordination and alignment between the various processes in this difficult area of permitting. Furthermore, we stress in the report the importance of sustainability and environmental responsibility through all stages of research and design and planning and installing of offshore renewable facilities. We underline the need to continue increasing electricity interconnections between member states, as well as the inclusion of neighboring countries and regions. That's an important role for EU seaports. We see that there's a big need for using all the financial means available in terms of all the research programs that is available within EU prerogatives. And we need to further develop technologies in tidal, wave, etc., etc. And I think, and that's also an important point to add, that there are extremely interesting industrial perspectives also in maintaining a lead in competitiveness in offshore renewable energy from a European perspective at large. So job creation, research and development, export potentials and opportunities are also a part of this big complex that we do not have to underestimate. So the report, all in all, tries to install a sense of urgency. We really need to ensure that we maintain speed. If not, we will not fulfill our ambitions in terms of climate. So, and let me wrap this up, Joachim. I think it's an extremely interesting phase that we're entering now. We have proposals on the table. We have the Green Deal from the European Commission that's now in the hands of Parliament and member states. Let's bear in mind that this is 3,800 pages of legislation, perhaps the biggest single project in the history of the European Union. And this is what we have to work with over the next year or two. So the upcoming time is going to be so interesting, so intense. And we are really laying out the foundation, the groundwork for our 2030 ambitions and going beyond this to 2050. And offshore renewables obviously have such a key role in this to play. Now, the Commissioner, in her introductory speech, she mentioned the State of the Energy Union, which we debated in the plenary session in Strasbourg this week. And she rightfully said that the good news is that renewables are in 2020 the most important source of energy in the Union. The bad side of the story is that energy dependency of imports from outside of the European Union is actually increasing. And it ought to be the other, it had to be the other development. That was exactly the aim of the Energy Union, to reduce the dependency on imports from third countries. And so how to address this? Well, obviously, the integration of offshore renewables and renewables in general is absolutely key to this, because thereby Europe at large would be able to produce renewable energy to an extent that would make us independent on imports from third countries. Let me wrap it up here. Joachim, thank you so much again for inviting me. I wish you a very good conference, and I'm looking so much forward to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Morten. Very enthusiastic words. And of course, I fully share that we are living in very interesting times, huge transformations ahead of us. And therefore, we have to talk. And we have to talk about offshore wind energy. And we have 6 panelists which are extremely experienced. And if I look at the list, I see that the most of them coming from the Nordic countries, from Great Britain, from Norway, from Denmark. So maybe this is also already a sign. So let me introduce, first of all, the panelists. I start with Vera. Vera is the Vice President of the Innovation at Transmission and Distribution Europe. That is the Association of the Electricity Transmission and Distribution Equipment and Services Industry. Then we have, welcome Vera. Then we have Dora. Dora is Deputy Director of CAN Europe. CAN is the abbreviation for Climate Action Network. Finally, we have Christian Ruby, Secretary General of Eurelectric, a well-known association. It's the Federation of the European Electricity Industry. We have the CEO of Wind Europe with us, Giles Dixon. Welcome, Giles. And then we have Christian Singlersen with us, also a Danish guy, the Director of ESA, the European Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. And last but not least, I warmly welcome my colleague Håkon Borgen. He is the chair of our Research, Development and Innovation Committee, and he is from Norway. Also, warm welcome to you, Håkon. So to keep up the discussion, maybe I can ask you for a short statement on a question, on a leading question, which is, from your perspective, what is, on your perspective, from your daily business, the key factor to make the integration of offshore renewable energy in the European grid for the future a success? And maybe I start with Dora, that she give us her view on that. Dora, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joachim. Thank you very much also to ENTSO-E for the invitation for today's conference. Bringing the NGO climate perspective on the table, of course, increasing offshore renewable energy is an essential part for the solution to averting climate change. And the EU needs to significantly increase its climate action in line with the Paris Agreement objective, achieving climate neutrality by 2040 and a fully renewable energy system by the same year. This also means faster deployment of offshore renewable energy, such as offshore wind, as part of this journey. For this to happen, there's a need for a clear policy framework, as it was already mentioned, and careful planning also in respect to marine ecosystems based on greater regional cooperation. A stronger policy framework, starting with a higher EU renewable energy target of 50% by 2030, and stronger measures that will give the direction we need to go. And when it comes to planning, marine special plans have an important role to play as well. Member states need to assess if and how maritime activities are in line with the Paris Agreement objectives and set clear priorities for the renewable energy production while phasing out fossil fuels. At the same time, a holistic approach towards the marine ecosystems is needed in these plans. Short-term action is, of course, critical, but we also need to plan beyond 2030 towards 2040 for what is needed in a full renewable energy system based energy system, as offshore energy takes a long lead time to deploy. This also means that member states need to work very much together, with regional cooperation being a key guiding principle for planning and development of offshore renewable energy, and this will also help share better benefits of common projects among countries. To sum up, a clear policy framework and careful long-term planning based on enhanced regional cooperation will support the increase of offshore renewable energy while preserving our oceans and respecting our marine ecosystems. We will need all sustainable solutions at hand in order to achieve our climate and energy goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dora. And I would directly hand over to Giles, the CEO of Wind Europe. Giles, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Joachim. Answers to your question, what will make the integration of offshore renewables a success? First point, Morten is absolutely right. Permitting is key. We just won't do this if we do not simplify the permitting rules and procedures for the offshore renewable energy, which means essentially offshore wind farms, and also the permitting arrangements for the essential grid connections. There are deadlines, legally binding deadlines in EU law that came into force in July this year that say every member state of the EU must ensure that decisions on permits must be taken within 2 years of original application. There's hardly any member state that's currently meeting that requirement. The European Commission has said it will issue guidance to member states next year, in the middle of next year, on how they can and should simplify their permitting rules and procedures, and crucially ensure that they have enough staff working in their permitting authorities. That guidance will be essential. Permitting authorities, these are a part of the ongoing negotiations on the 10E regulation. There's still at least one more trilogue discussion to go, as you know very well, Morten. And there are some important proposals on the table. Notably, a very useful proposal to create a single contact point for each sea basin that would coordinate the work of the different national permitting authorities involved in offshore wind farm permit awards around each sea basin. We hope that the Parliament and the Council will be able to reach agreement on that. It would be an invaluable contribution towards accelerating the build-out of offshore wind and grid connections. The 10E negotiations are also looking at wording which would establish an integrated approach to network development in each sea basin. This means, in practice, the TSOs around a sea basin, along with the relevant national governments and the offshore wind farm developers sitting around a table with a large map on it, looking ahead and doing some integrated, joined up planning. Again, Morten, we hope that you'll arrive at the right outcome in the TENI negotiations on that. Joachim, individual TSOs are doing some fantastic work on grid investments to connect offshore wind, on innovative approaches to grid planning. Just this week, Energinet and 50 Hertz signed a collaboration agreement on this. The Belgian and Danish governments also signed, again, just this week, a memorandum of agreement together with their respective TSOs, Energinet and Elia, on this. And Elia published a very important vision paper showing how the build-out of offshore grid connections can help to facilitate energy flows across Europe and reduce the costs of the energy transition. One final observation, if I may. Hybrid offshore wind farms. These are the offshore wind farms that will have a grid connection that is something different to the standard point-to-point single grid connection back to the mother country, which has been the model for connecting offshore wind farms so far. These hybrid offshore wind farms may have grid connections to 2 or more countries. They may be a hub and spoke approach where you have an artificial island in the North Sea, offshore wind farms connecting to it, and then a single DC cable back to the mother country from the hub that is the artificial island. They may be offshore wind farms plugging into an international subsea interconnector. All of these hybrid designs are good because they allow for the pooling of generation and transmission assets. They save money, they save space in the sea, and they improve energy flows between countries. Unfortunately, nobody's investing in them today, and they are not investing in them because the European Commission is minded to apply the 70% rule of Article 16 in the electricity regulation to these hybrid offshore wind farms. Now, the wind industry supports the 70% rule for pure interconnectors. That's what it was designed for. But hybrid offshore wind farms are not pure interconnectors. They are combined generation and transmission assets. And if you try to apply the 70% rule to them, you're basically saying to the offshore wind farm developer, well, tough luck, but the electrons you want to produce, they might get squeezed out by the requirement that the national TSOs have at either end of your grid connections to ensure 70% capacity availability. Therefore, the offshore wind farm developer does not know how much of their electricity they're going to be able to sell. They don't know what their revenues will be, and they don't invest. So we've asked the Commission to not apply the 70% rule to hybrid offshore wind farms. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Giles, for that very comprehensive view on that. May I add, the permission of grids is not only for offshore, but also for onshore. We should forget that. But we will have a session 2 where the way towards an integrated system of systems will be tackled, and I'm sure that it will be tackled there. Coming back to our first question, the question was, to wrap it up, what do you think are the key factors of making the integration of offshore a success? And now I would like to hand over to Christian from Eurelectric. Christian, please.
Thank you. I don't know what has happened. Apparently, Giles has taken my speaking points. So Giles, can you please give them back? No, I have a few points along the same lines. Permitting is absolutely crucial here. What I always say is that ambition requires permission. And I think we need to be clear about the fact that we need to go even further. It is fine with guidance and guidelines from the Commission. It is absolutely critically needed, but we need to think big here. We need to go further. We need to be really, really bold. We heard the Commissioner say it takes 6 to 7 years to get the permit. We're in 2021 now, so you add 7 years and you're in 2028. And then you need to quintuple the amount of offshore wind in that time period. It just does not add up unless we do something else. We need to think bold, and we need to come up with a new approach that integrates the perspective of biodiversity together with the climate. Instead of letting these two, let's say, play a zero-sum game against each other, we need to find out how we can make coexistence work and speed up those permitting processes. The second thing is infrastructure. It is absolutely critical that we build out the infrastructure in parallel and make this happen at the same speed. And here, when it comes to the planning, I think one concrete thing that we need to improve is that there's a disconnect between the onshore planning and the offshore planning. Currently, the one is taking place, or the overall planning is taking place in a 2-year cycle, whereas the offshore planning is taking place in a 3-year cycle. We need to align that in order to make sure this happens, because at the end of the day, the offshore wind needs to go to the country, to the countries of Europe, go onshore. So this needs to be integrated and thought out better. With regard to the investment frameworks, Giles touched upon this issue of the hybrid projects. I think it's really important that we understand that an interconnector built as part of a hybrid project is not a traditional interconnector. It is a part-time interconnector, and it is a part-time feeder line to evacuate wind energy. So it should not be treated in the same way as a cross-border interconnector on the continent. It's a different concept. And just to add to the importance of hybrid projects, if we go with a hybrid approach, we're going to save some 5 to 10% of the overall cost. So there's a really strong economic case for going towards the hybrid concepts. So I'd leave those as my first 3 intervention points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. We have a strong interaction and also a good alignment, I would say, between the speakers. What I heard from all the first 3 is the permitting and also the infrastructure. So let's see where it will bring us. Vera is now talking to us. Maybe, Vera, you can talk also about the DC circuit breaker for interconnections of DC grids. I'm not sure if you are working on that. No, I'm sure that you're working on that. But first of all, maybe you give your key statement also on the key factors for a success story on wind. Vera, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Excellent. Thank you.
So first of all, I wanted to again say that it looks like my talking points went to both Giles and Christian, which is absolutely excellent. So I will really pick up on the technology perspective from the OEM association I represent. So there's one first point for us that is critical, is this anticipation and coordinated approach to the planning of both the offshore and the onshore grid. We have a capability in terms of resources, access to skills, footprint that allow us to meet a certain level of ramp up in terms of projects. And this is something we need to take into account in having us getting this vision of anticipation of what is the work to be done so that we can deliver from both a technology development as well as a project execution. The second thing is on a need to have a better and more coordinated approach on the technology development itself. So one of the things that's been great is the work done by ENTSO-E already in terms of trying to push for this coordinated approach on the grids, assessment of many different projects across Europe, showing the benefits of an integrated grid. But what we also need from a technology perspective is to continue the efforts on having functional specifications agreement. If we're going to face a wall of projects that will be coming that need to be delivered, especially on the HVDC space, we need to move into a more standardized approach in terms of the control philosophies, ratings, so that we can work more like what we do today in the AC world. The challenge is that the AC grids are old, so we had a lot of time with standardization bodies and technology development. We don't have this time to develop, for example, the very needed multi-terminal, multi-vendor HVDC systems that will enable, for example, the hybrid and meshed grids. So what we're doing now is to admit that we won't have the time to go through our normal cycle, which is working on the technology, getting the standards, doing the prototypes, and doing the first small implementation project to mitigate the risks of the scaling up of the projects, we will need to work in parallel by starting to collaborate among different OEMs with the transmission grid operators, wind farm developers, to try to understand how these systems will work and mitigate in advance the risks. This learning will be fed into the standardization bodies. So what we really need to do is to make sure that we continue having this approach of working with the TSOs and finding ways not only to mitigate the technical risk, but also carrying the operational risk of the execution of the projects, which is something that's not possible to do today in the regulation. So very much being that from the multi-terminal, multi-vendor HVDC, or the DC circuit breaker industrialization, because to reassure you, the technology is there, is more on when do we need to take the step and investment into getting it industrialized and ready in the market. And so I am thinking that we need to pursue this collaboration, and I want to cite that we have a joint project proposal on multi-terminal, multi-vendor HVDC, looking for EU funding. That will be a very important step towards getting the technology ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vera, for this comprehensive view from the manufacturer's side. And also your needs on us, on the regulation, on the TSOs and all the stakeholders for delivering the products. We heard already a lot of permitting of markets and so on, and therefore I'm very happy to hand over now to Christian Zinglersen, the director of ACER. Christian.
Thank you, Jochen. Your question was to list one key factor for making the integration of offshore wind a success. So that's in the singular. There are many factors, obviously. So I would point to one then, as asked, and I would say getting the wind energy to the end consumer in an efficient way. Mm-hmm. And the end consumer, if you take the vast amounts of capacity which may be added in the future, those end consumers could basically be all over Europe. So in a sense, the offshore story is not an offshore story. It's a comprehensive offshore, onshore, demand center type story. So that means that everyone will sort of need to be on board. Those member states that are directly on the seaboard, but certainly also those member states that are a bit more, shall we say, on in the center of the continent, who may have some of the demand centers very far away from the generation sites. So it is a really sort of multi-member state effort, and not just, shall we say, an offshore sea basin member state type of effort. And for me, that implies two things. One is to have a much better coordinated infrastructure development. Some of the previous speakers spoke to that too. There are delays today in terms of getting significant transmission projects up and running. There's probably a reason for those delays in some quarters, that there's a perceived lack of localized benefit. And indeed, if the offshore vision is to connect vast amounts of offshore generation to demand centers far away all across Europe, some of those projects will be increasingly for transit. And I would expect that perception of lack of benefits to increase rather than decrease. Secondly, we'll need to use the infrastructure to its full potential. And that means that we'll need to rely on cross-border trade significantly, and the capacities for trade will need to be there. That includes the 70%. I'll speak a little bit about that, I think, in the next follow-up session, because I have a somewhat different view than expressed. You mentioned, Joachim, the Nordic composition, Nordic-ish composition on this particular panel. So let me just point very briefly to the Nordics, where actually we see some worrying signs currently as to the availability of cross-border trade across different Nordic countries. And let me just say that that would not be on in a future with this offshore vision, where exactly you have vast generation offshore, but the vision is to get that to demand centers very far away and not necessarily in offshore states. So that needs to be tackled, and that involves respecting the 70%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for these remarkable aspects. I can fully underline, for example, in my own grid, I was director several years, decades for system operation within Germany. When I started, the average transport distance was 40 kilometers. So that was in the beginning of 2000. And nowadays it's already 4 times higher. So, and that is without offshore energy. So we will have a vast generation offshore, and that would also increase the need for long distance transports even more. But I would like to go finally to the next Nordic contributor to our panel. It's Håkon Borgren, who is working with Statnett, but on the other hand side, he is also chair of the Research Development Innovation Committee for ENTSO-E. And Håkon, what is your perspective on the key challenges and the key messages?
Well, thank you very much for that really big question. I think we're facing a transformation with 10 times more wind and more sun, and it all calls for more cooperation and more innovation. So I think one key factor is to see the whole system as one. The offshore grid and the onshore grid is one system. So we have to have a holistic view on this. That's really important. And of course, the interoperability in the offshore domain and the need for accelerated innovation. We need to build a DC grid together. So far, the HVDC development has been some sort of a point-to-point development. And Statnett has been heavily involved with that, with interconnectors between UK and Norway and Germany. And we knew all about the lock-in. So we need to find solutions, how to cooperate. And the good thing is that we have no roadmaps in ENTSO-E in the RDI domain together with the manufacturers, as stated by Tinde Europe and others. So we do have a map, but we need real projects. We have to go from studies to real projects, and we have to make prototypes. And time is running. So that means we have to act together. We have to create also legal and sound regulatory governance for developing a full-scale, multi-vendor, multi-terminal, multi-purpose demonstration asset. And it's not small figures, it's big figures when it comes to costs. And so far, we cannot do anything before we actually go out and just do it. So I think that is maybe my most concrete input here in the beginning. But of course, we have also market design issues, but we will come back to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Håkon. And thanks also to the audience. We have already a lot of questions, and I would directly go to the first question, which has the most likes. And that is coming from an anonymous person out of the audience. And the question is, how can we ensure future offshore hybrid projects are financially, now the question is gone, financially viable? So it's about the financing I had in mind. So how can we ensure that these projects are done while preserving the international energy market and having a non-discriminatory way of using the grid between the users? So that is a question about financing, about also the market, the energy market. What is the energy market in the future, and how are the grid users then performing? And maybe I give this question directly to Christian Zinglersen, because he is in the lead of developing these procedures together with the European Commission. Christian, may I ask you to come up with the answer to this very complex and complicated question?
That's a tough one, Joachim. Thanks. But,
thanks for that.
No, it's fine. Thanks a lot. I think it actually relates a little bit to what I suspect will be the second round of discussions on market design more broadly. So I'll freestyle it a bit, I guess. I would like to take just one small baby step backwards and maybe pose the counter question: what is the overall aim? Is the overall aim to meet a certain quantitative target of a specific technology for generation? Or is the overall aim to have that much capacity of clean power to decarbonize our economies at scale in Europe? I would hope that most of us would rally around the second aim as opposed to the first one. And therefore, I think this needs to be couched within the overall market framework, which would be the most efficient framework to get a maximum amount of zero carbon electricity to end consumers. Hopefully that would be it. Offshore has a very significant role to play in that overall component. So when the question comes how to ensure financing, I would say bumper sticker wise, it would be necessary to lower the offtake risk. So the maximum amount of that energy generated could be sold on attractive market terms. And then how does one lower offtake risks? Well, in my opinion, it means that you have to have the transmission necessary, working well with significant capacities offered for the market, and you lower the risk of curtailment. That brings up, I think, maybe from the first round, the view of the 70% from some. I don't know, Joachim, if you want me to add a few words on that, because I have a different take on it, or whether in the interest of time, you want to maybe reserve the discussion on the 70% for
the second panel, yeah. I would like to hand over directly to Giles and later on also to Christian, because Christian Ruby, because they may have also, especially to the question on financing these assets in offshore, and how can it be done in a good way that the people are going to invest in these offshore grids and in these offshore production generation? What are their needs from their perspective? So I would like to hand over to Giles for a hopefully shorter statement, and to Christian, because we have a lot of other questions. Maybe you can tackle that. Giles, please.
Thank you, Joachim. Look, the finance is available. The banks and the institutional investors really want to invest in offshore wind farms and in the grid connections. But it's one thing to have finance available, but finance won't happen if there is not a perspective of stable revenues. You just won't get an investment decision through any corporate investment committee if that committee cannot see, for the first 15 years of the project at least, while they've got to pay off their finance, a clear perspective of stable revenues. And this is the problem with the 70% rule, that it takes all perspective of revenue stability away. We agree with the 70% rule for pure interconnectors, but trying to impose it on the hybrid offshore wind farms, which are combined generation and transmission assets and are not pure interconnectors, it simply removes the revenue perspective, and therefore you won't get investments, and hybrid offshore wind farms simply will not happen.
Thank you very much for this very clear and crisp statement, Giles. I was not aware that the 70% was beside of that what we had as challenges from that also, so such a big problem for the wind generation. Christian also mentioned that, but Christian Singlerson, but I want to go first to Christian Ruby again, if he has other aspects on the financial and investments on offshore. Christian.
Yeah, I'd perhaps mention two additional aspects here. I think that the first, let's say, prerequisite for these investments to happen is that the category is properly accepted. Today, a project falls either under transmission or generation, and the very definition of hybrid is that it's the two combined. So a clearer recognition of this important category of investments is needed. And then I think the ownership question can always be dealt with later. I don't think the utilities are sitting around and really, wanting necessarily to own a lot of transmission system infrastructure. The second thing I would mention, in addition to the 70% rule, is that a quite important question is the redistribution of congestion income that can also help provide a proper investment, let's say, perspective for generators here. And perhaps the last thing, and that is again back to the very fundamentals, we need to make sure that the basic respect for the market is there. One of the things we've been grappling with, frankly, in the power market in the last few months is that governments make massive interventions in the market, which basically completely kill the business case for everything, and threaten the existence of companies because random taxes are imposed overnight due to the rising energy prices. So here's another thing to look at.
Thank you so much, Christian, for that. Yeah, market is always good if the prices are near zero. but this is another story. I would like to go to another aspect. I hope we can tackle the 70% because it seems to be a due point in the whole discussion. Because also Christian and Giles maybe had another opportunity to explain what they exactly mean. And Christian Singlerson, I want to go to him. But we have some other questions from the audience. I want to jump in directly in a very important question for the TSOs, which has also very high likes. This is a question for Hervé. I do not think Hervé is here, but maybe Håkon can answer it. And it's a question, I would say, where me as system operating guy, I'm quite astonished about, and also, interesting to hear what is your opinion. The question is, should the level of security of supply not be open for discussion? And in my personal opinion, that means should we lower the level of security of supply, where the striving for the highest level of security of supply obstructs the acceleration of the transition towards renewable energy. My question to Håkon is, first of all, is this true? Is that striving for the highest level of security of supply obstructing the acceleration? And the second is, what is your perspective on lowering it?
Well, that's a very good question. I think if we look into the future, we have to understand that we will have a factor of 10 on production of wind and solar, and we need a huge amount of flexibility. So in a way, in the future, we have to adapt to the thought that the demand is following the production and not the opposite. And that's really a big change. So we have to see on the resources we have, like hydrogen, how that could help in the production. Of course, when we have an enormous amount of volume of new wind coming in, the price will collapse and we need a lot of production of hydrogen. But on the other hand, when it's no wind, of course, then we don't want to produce hydrogen. We would like to use it. So I think the whole security supply needs to be looked at. But saying that, we need to look into this as a holistic one system, as I said earlier today. So we also need to use what we experienced on the development of the market design, on how to coordinate, how to use the regional control centers, of course, to enhance the security supply. Because it's not difficult to make a renewable system. What is difficult is to make it resilient. That's the key. So I think it's some sort of a balanced approach. We need to understand that the whole idea of security of supply will change, for sure.
Thank you very much, Håkon. Does anybody else from the panelists have an opinion on lowering the level of security of supply? Christian Singlerson, what is your perception on that?
I actually found myself agreeing with Håkon what he said. So I vote for his answer if I can do it in that way.
Yeah, no problem with that. And I want to put your attention to the session 3, where we have the flexibility issue as a complete session. Maybe we can talk to that then later on in the session 3. So stay tuned, and you will have some additional insights on the flexibility and the demand side interaction with our consumers. I have one very high-ranked question, which has nothing to do with our session. It is about the Ukrainian interconnection to ENTSO-E. I can assure you that we are working very hard on that, and that the plans and our project is going very well. The question was, is it possible to interconnect them in 2033, sorry, and that is our plan to do so. And at the moment, we do not see any, I would say, major obstacles. But it is on the system islanding tests, which we'll process with Ukraine in winter and in summer, and then we look at the results, and then we go on. So at the moment, we are very good on track there. That was just an inside view on that question. It was ranked very high, therefore I took it. It has nothing to do with offshore, but let's go back to offshore, where we heard that offshore is really also a question of permitting. I would like to ask Dora a question. And the question is, what from a civil society perspective should one pay attention to in order to gain the public support for offshore wind development and maybe also for offshore grid developments? Dora.
Yes, thank you, Joachim. I just wanted to say that there is already significant public support for renewables, and we shouldn't forget that. Of course, the local circumstances may differ, and of course, we have a big task ahead of us to speed up the deployment of renewable energy, including offshore. But it is very important to keep reminding ourselves that the support is there overall. Of course, we need social dialogue and inclusive processes, that is without saying, and getting local communities informed and engaged in this process with as well looking at biodiversity protection is very important. And for that, obviously for offshore wind and offshore renewable energy in general should be done through that consistent and inclusive and transparent planning process, also for construction and operation. When we talk about engaging the local communities, we're talking about, of course, from an early stage, and they need to have access to all the necessary information and be informed and be able to contribute and give input to whenever it's possible. And this meaningful involvement of relevant stakeholders will also help understand better their concerns and communicate about the specific local characteristics that may a region or a local area have, and also in as a consequence also address those concerns if necessary. Now, citizens should also be involved directly involved in the offshore deployment, and that is very important. I think they need to the citizens need to be empowered and put at the heart of the energy transition. There are already a few examples, of course, of citizens' participation in Denmark and in the Netherlands, and in Belgium, as we have heard, energy communities are also preparing and getting more involved in the project. And this needs to be, of course, encouraged. But of course, it also needs to become more easy and more attractive. For example, by reducing administrative barriers. And again, I wanted to highlight that there is a need to integrate the marine environmental aspect in offshore deployment as right from the start, which will help, of course, complement the aspect of public engagement. I think overall, the deployment of offshore renewables, it's not about only, as it was already mentioned, I think, address the technical issues, but also incorporate the social and economic dimension and ensure the dialogue and a transparent process for public involvement in order to provide all the opportunities to people and especially to local communities to engage in the energy transition.
Thank you so much, Dora. So it's a shame we are running out of time so quickly. I have so many interesting questions here, which are all absolutely worth to talk about. Unfortunately, I have to pick out one, which is also for me very interesting, which is coming from anonymous guy from the audience. And the question is, what operation models would enable offshore development, especially under the search of hybrid projects? So we did not talk about operation up to now. We talked about permission. We talked about the market. We talked about the 70%. Unfortunately, not intensive enough, but maybe we will have the chance later on. But now talking about operation and maybe also from a manufacturer side, what is needed for that operation. So maybe we start with Håkon, and then we go to Christian Ruby, and maybe also to Vera then at the end, with a plea for a very short and brief statement on that. Håkon.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you mentioned in the introduction, we have some position papers from ENTSO-E, and one is dealing with offshore system operation. And what we say is that today's regulatory setup is suitable for coping with the stepwise development of offshore grid infrastructure. In a way, we can think locally when the market parties, the TSO should remain responsible for system operation and the balancing and the system real time, exactly as we do onshore. And think regionally, the regional coordination of system operation in regional control centers is of course there, so we can utilize that as we do today. And think European, of course, existing EU regulation defines roles and responsibility for onshore and offshore. So in a way, if all this is set up in a good way, we can take all the knowledge we have from more than 30 years of development of the global's most advanced power system and just use it offshore. So it's really a good setup. We can just, in a way, cope as much as possible, as I said earlier, with offshore. Thank you.
Thank you, Håkon. Christian, Ruby, I would like to ask what is his perspective from the Eurelectric point of view?
Yeah, I think where we are right now on this is a little bit back to Håkon's point. We're basically in uncharted territory with a lot of this. We need to do things we've never done before at an enormous scale, and that inevitably raises some questions where I think it's wise not to claim that you have the full answers. Where we are in this discussion right now is that we're looking at a home market model and an offshore bidding zone model. And Eurelectric has not articulated a very clear preference for either of them because each of them come with a lot of unanswered questions because we're looking at such massive volumes and such a new, let's say, system and infrastructure. Just very briefly, of course, the offshore bidding zone model is a new concept where you have a huge production in a let's say space in a bidding zone without an actual demand. So how do you establish that? And on the other hand, as discussed, the home market model is going to be tricky in relation to the 70% rule. So we have not taken a very sharp stance. It needs to be either or. We will engage in the discussion and try to be specific in the questions we raise, regardless of what direction this discussion takes.
Thank you, Christian, for that. And maybe I ask also Vera again for her perspective from the manufacturer side on this operation. Will it be possible to operate these huge hybrid grids in the future? What are the tools? Are there standards? Do you have already the material for doing that?
So I agree with Christian. There's quite a lot of unknowns on how we're going to be operating this system with all these new offshore, a lot of it connected with HVDC, with controls that we are yet working on the development. So what for me is important to take into account at this stage is understanding clearly through quite a lot of the studies what is the impact of having this new grid infrastructure on the overall grid operation, and also what is expected in terms of the support that this new technology can give to grid operations. So there's at the moment a very broad number of asks from different customers on what do they expect from a grid forming capability, grid support services coming from, namely the HVDC infrastructure connecting the offshore, and there is a huge potential that can be reached by using the right control. So I feel that as part of this collaboration on functional specification and capability of controls, we should take a big look at what do they need to do to support the grid operations in the future, so that today we know that working on the grid forming capabilities is a priority, but there's not enough clarity yet coming from the system operators on what they will be expecting in the future.
So we have to work on that as TSOs. Already we are doing as TSOs, doing installation in synchronous compensators, in statecomms and so on. So this will definitely increase in the future. I would like to thank all of the panelists. Before I'm going to wrap up, unfortunately our time is over. I'm going to try to wrap up what was said. I would like to ask our distinguished speaker, Morten, what is your key takeaway from our today's discussion? Morten.
Thank you so much, Joachim. And I wouldn't want to summarize all these great points made, but I think there's an overall direction, and that is obviously that so much hard work is being done in terms of integrating renewable offshore energy into our systems, and obviously that provides a lot of issues, difficult technical issues, logistical issues, financial issues, and at the end of the day, political issues. So I think it's also clear from a discussion like this that this is taken so seriously by stakeholders, by industry, which it should. And I'm so happy to having learned so much just through the discussion today. So I want to congratulate you on all the hard work being done within the ENTSO-E on this, and I'm happy to see that this work is being undertaken with that speed, because there is really a sense of urgency in further integrating renewable offshore energy into our system. So let me again thank you very much, Joachim, for the invitation today, and I wish you a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pedersen. It was an honor to have you here on the panel. And my task is now to wrap up the whole discussion, which is more or less, in my opinion, quite a challenge in 1 minute. Let me say it like this. What I heard about the challenges, there are a lot of challenges about, for example, the permission for building that, for infrastructure development, standards for HVDC, we talked about that. We talked about the market design. We talked about sustainability. All these are, of course, challenges. On the other hand side, what I heard is that offshore wind, offshore energy is one of the major forming blocks of our future towards carbon neutrality and climate neutrality energy supply within Europe. And that is, I think, the overall topic, that offshore is, I would say, part of the future. And I would invite you to all together to work on that great objective, all together with all associations, with all partners, with all experts, with NGOs, with TSOs, with regulators, with European Commission and legislative people and all the experts. And having said that, I hope this is a good conclusion, and I hand over the floor to Sonja again.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you, Joachim. Thank you to Mr. Pedersen and to all our panelists for a great discussion. I do feel the learnings from onshore could be beneficial to offshore. There's lots of challenges, but we have actually explored a lot of them with the onshore. So it's an interesting move towards offshore now. But we have experienced a lot of this permitting and delays and so on. So do you think we can actually learn from all of that?
Absolutely, we have definitely profit from our more than 100 years system operation. The first interconnection, European-wide interconnection, was built in the 1920s. So we have a huge experience in operating bulk grids. The European grid is the biggest interconnected grid in the world. It is a tendency even to grow, as I said it with Ukraine. We have excellent operational practices. We can learn from that. And by the way, we already, connected offshore wind generation to our system. So I'm very confident and I'm very optimistic that we can learn from the past, develop it in the future, and have also in the future a system where we might not lower the system security standards in Europe.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you very much. It's a glass half full.
I would say even more.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we move now to our second discussion. And I'm delighted here to bring on stage our Vice President Zbynek Baldus, who will join us in the introduction on the panel of energy system integration, very much a topic close to my heart. Welcome, Zbynek. Thank you.
Hello, Sonia.
Good morning, Spinnik. And how are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm very good. Are you ready for our session? Energy system integration.
Yes, I am, and I'm very glad to be here. And I can see that the conference goes very well. So I hope we will continue in that way with the next session.
All the best.
Thank you very much. So, hello everybody. My name is Zbigniew Boldyś. I am the ENTSO-E Vice President. And today I have an honor to moderate the second session. The second session is there to discover the system integration, the integrated energy system, and how to develop the inclusive system planning as well. ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G together in the last years jointly prepared 2022 TYNDP scenarios. And in these scenarios, we for the first time use new methodologies for system integration and also new models for system planning and for new modeling tools as well. So in this way, we would like to optimize all the efficiencies which we identified in the system, and also we would like to include all flexibility which is brought with this system integration, as well as to identify new interactions and new dynamics which occur due to new interfaces between new system sectors. So when we look at TYNDP 2022, there we can see that the new system and new coupling of energy systems can deliver more and new efficient decarbonization solutions and enable European production of gas and electricity to reach the carbon neutrality by 2050. Before I invite our panelists and and ask them the first questions, let me introduce our keynote speaker, who is Director for the Green Transition and Energy System Integration in DC Energy in the European Commission, Mrs. Katarina Sikov-Magni. So please welcome Katarina.
Many thanks and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today to discuss so many topical issues. But let me start with the European Green Deal. And as you know, our ambition is to make the EU climate neutral by 2050. We are the last generation of policymakers that can undertake action before certain changes to our climate and nature become irreversible. Luxury is time is a feature of the past. We need to act now. But to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, the EU has set a higher binding target of a net reduction of at least 55% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 already. And the legislative package that then aims to deliver this objective, the so-called Fit for 55 package, was presented last July, and it aims at aligning all EU legislation necessary to meet the target. There were, of course, some proposals before, like the regulation on trans-European energy networks, and there are some proposals that will still follow in December on hydrogen and decarbonizing gases, among others. But the July package comprised of 12 legislative proposals, ranging from emission trading system extension, effort sharing amendments, transport-related aspects, land use-related proposals, etc. And of course, there was the proposal on reviewing the Renewables Directive and to increase the target there correspondingly then to at least 40%. all these elements and the renewables in particular will have a major impact on the grids, on their planning, and on the need for system integration. The energy system overall is becoming increasingly more complex, but also more sustainable and efficient. Now, more than ever, the consumer is really becoming and need to be at the center of the transition. And when designing our integrated energy systems, a cornerstone of a climate-proof integrated system continues to be improving our energy efficiency. The energy system compatible with this 55% greenhouse gas emission reduction means at least 60% emission reductions by 2030 in buildings, but also in the power sector. And on the one hand, therefore, what we need is much more electrification with production based on renewable energies, of course, to cover an increasingly rapidly increasing demand for electricity in sectors like heating and cooling, in transport, in industry, etc. Electricity is set to meet around half of our energy demand by 2050, and by 2030, a third of it. So a lot of more electrification is needed. Most of this demand, for most of the demand, electrification will be the solution, and it should be based, as I said, on renewables. But to use the use of fossil-based energy resources needs to decrease dramatically. This has been the focus of the COP26 discussions recently. But certain sectors are likely to remain reliant on combustible fuels in the future as well. And this means that to reach the carbon neutral ambition can only be achieved by the greater use of not only electrification, but also of fuels molecules. One potential solution to this is to convert renewable energy sources into hydrogen. And the processed hydrogen provides high-grade heat that can be used in transport as a fuel, in industries as a material, and in agriculture as a fertilizer. And that, again, relies on electrification and more grids. Both for the direct use of electricity, but also for the production of renewable hydrogen, offshore renewables will play a critical role. And this, I was pleased to hear, was extensively discussed in the previous session. But there are still several barriers that would delay, if not prevent, energy system integration from fully materializing and allowing citizens to embrace the cleaner energy alternatives and bring industry also to the decarbonized future world. The cross-sectoral links are important. They need to become stronger in order to create the conditions that enable and encourage further integration. ENTSO-E, with strong collaboration with the rest of the stakeholders, has an important opportunity here to play a key role in bringing us to the decarbonized future. Just to give a few examples here, so the strengthening of the planning together with the ENTSO-G in the relevant areas like scenario building, looking at impacts, looking at how energy efficiency affects, and then looking at new trends and technologies is important. But this includes also then looking beyond the traditional, well-known technologies, looking into batteries and storage, the increased variability of renewables in the system will have also impacts on the planning and how electricity will flow. Decentralization, the need for more flexibility are obvious elements here, and the recently created EU DSO entity will be an important player together with ENTSO-E. To conclude, the better integration of the energy system is an also necessary to achieve a cost-effective decarbonization of the economy without coming out from the sectoral silos, if I may call them like that. Our transition would be more costly and might even be impossible to implement. What we need to then look at also is how to bring consumers, citizens, and with us. They certainly can be important in providing flexibility to the system, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, citizens are key for the implementation of any project we are thinking of. They need to understand why we need these projects and what they bring to society and decarbonization in order to be then in line with their ambitions for and need to preserve nature as well. So the EU power system will become increasingly important for the EU economy due to the increased need for electrification of final demand, but it will also become increasingly decentralized, interconnected, and relying on digitalization. Overall, and I will finish here, the need is for much, much more cooperation, much, much more inclusiveness in order to deliver the system we need for the future. Many thanks, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Katarina, for these words. It was very impressive, strong messages and very clearly stated. So I'm very happy to have this keynote speech from you. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers on the panel. First of all, it will be the CEO of Renewable Grid Initiative, Antonella Battalini. Then Chief Engineer at the grid technology company SmartWires, Marie Hayden. Then President IFEC Europe, the International Federation of Industrial Energy Consumers, Peter Klaas. Then we have System Development Director of ENTSO-E, of European Network of Transmission System Operators for Gas, Louis Watin. And then we have Chairman of the European Green Vehicles Initiative Association for the 2.0 Partnership, Stephan Neugebauer. And Secretary General of the European Heat Pump Association, Thomas Novak. And last but not least, from ENTSO-E side, it's Gerard Kendler, who is chairing our System Development Committee. Welcome, everybody. So, to kick off the first question and to start the debate, I have one very well-prepared question, and that is to all of you. What, from your point of view, is needed to bring energy system integration from promise to practice in Europe? So could we start with the ladies? So please, maybe Antonella or Marie, please go ahead.
I'm happy to start if you want. So system integration seems to be one of the main topics discussed these days, rightly so, because it's so important. The other topics are permitting and increasingly people and environment. What is needed is that we indeed go beyond the silos and look at the system as a very broad and varied, full of different varieties of options and opportunities. So if you want to do system integration, I think today we know from a technical point of view what is needed. We may not have all the answers, but more or less the engineers will sort them out. We know from an economic point of view that the money is there. We only need to put in place the right incentives, and that will be solved. Political commitment is there. We have packages and framework in Europe, at least, a clear direction. But what we have absolutely no clue is how to deal with people and how to deal with ecosystem biology. And this inability of really embedding the energy system into the broader societal environmental system is what we are facing today as a main challenge. We will not solve the permitting issue by simply reducing the timeline for decisions. We will need to find solutions. And what I would like to add is that we need to think about system integration with having in mind that resources are scarce, and so we need to optimize across all possible actors and systems for the entire supply chains and in the deployment. This requires completely new mentality, a new approach, and it requires vested interest to be put aside for achieving what we have decided to achieve as a society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Marie Hayden.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we definitely need for system integration is well-functioning electricity grids that can support the connection of large-scale renewable energy developments. And I have two key points I'd like to make in that regard. I think the first one is about cost, and we've heard a lot about cost already today. I think Kadri Simpson mentioned something like a 61 billion euro investment in grids is required. And I do support the need for large-scale infrastructure development, but we also need to ensure we focus on maximizing the efficiency and the usage of our existing grids. We see a lot of congestion on our grids today, but in fact, there's a lot of spare capacity that is available on these grids. It's just stuck behind bottlenecks. And we can access that with the better use of technology. And technology can help us lower the overall investment required in our grids and address this issue of cost. And often technology can, of course, do this much quicker than our conventional solutions. And many of the technologies that can address issues with underutilization don't require significant time in permitting, so they can be deployed much faster. And that brings me to my second point, which is about urgency. I think if we take one thing away from this, as with COP26 and every other conference we attend, it's the constant reminder that CO2 emissions are cumulative and irreversible. And the sooner we reduce emissions, the more impactful we will be. And I don't believe we're doing enough to minimize congestion on our grids today. Congestion is causing the redispatch of renewable energy. It's causing the avoidable increase in CO2 emissions today. So I think we need our policymakers not just to focus on 2030 or being fit for 55. We also need a much sharper focus on policies that address the issues that are preventing fast adoption of technology and tackling congestion that exists today. ACER released a position paper on this earlier in the week. It brings a special focus on how to facilitate the efficient use of existing grid and technologies, and I suggest everybody has a look at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we have Peter to make his comments. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and well, largely agree with a lot of what has already been said. Maybe a few comments from consumer side. First, the first thing we need to do, I think, is really develop technology. I mean, to be a bit provocative, the only thing we know today is that if you have excessive electricity, renewable electricity, you can make hydrogen out of it. And two, we can use existing gas pipes to transport hydrogen. That's about what we know today. We really need to do a lot more to make sure that this technology is efficient, is affordable, and is a good match for other technologies that could contribute to the energy system of the future. That's one thing. Two, let's continue to look at the costs. I mean, this new energy system, whatever it is composed of, will also have to be affordable for households and will also have to lead to competitive prices for industry. Otherwise, I mean, it's no use throwing away the baby with the bathing water. Let's make sure that with whatever system we invent for the future, we can continue to have industry in Europe and to have affordable energy for households. Three, I think a huge challenge is in the permitting. It's going to be, well, we see that it's for society more and more difficult to accept additional pipelines, additional high voltage lines. So this is a challenge to find a match between what the system needs and what society is accepting as a burden under the form of infrastructure. And then last but not least, maybe an invitation also to ENTSO-E. Let's be technology neutral. Let's not only look at these technologies. Let's look at all technologies that can contribute to climate neutrality. I know that you can earn a lot by accumulating assets and by building up a regulated asset base, but all technologies should be looked into with an open face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There I can assure you that ENTSO-E is strictly technologically neutral. However, now I would like to give floor to ENTSO-G, our colleague. So, Louis Wattin, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here with you. And yeah, maybe just to answer my colleague of EFIET, I can assure you that when we build the scenarios together with ENTSO-E, the objective of the ENTSOs is not to add up more assets to the RAB or the electricity TSOs. So technology neutrality is indeed key. Maybe I would like first to start with what I think is important to recognize, the major success stories ENTSOG and ENTSO-E have already achieved regarding energy system integration. So far, we have developed joint scenarios for the TUNDP. We have developed an interlink model that is still under further development, where we want to assess projects jointly with ENTSO-E, so ENTSOG and ENTSO-E on gas and electricity side to see their impact. And we have also integrated the hydrogen infrastructure into the TUNDP for gas. Those are major steps. I think there is no similar example where two or even more different sectors, which are even partially competing, can sit and work together with one common objective, which is reach the EU climate and energy targets. These projects we have with the ENTSO-E have shown that when we break the silos for major energy carriers and we take a holistic view of the energy planning, the results are actually very positive. We never had such interest and stakeholder engagement before we developed our joint scenarios. It also shows that the existing mechanisms and existing institutions can already actively embrace the energy system integrations. Of course, that takes resources, that takes time, but this is already something doable. And I think with ENTSO-E, we can be proud that we just demonstrate that it can work. The next step for us should be to expand on these success stories, to encourage the integrated infrastructure scenarios and holistic energy system planning at national level, for instance, and also to integrate hydrogen into the onshore and offshore network planning, as it was mentioned earlier, to maximize the efficiency and to avoid another silo effect. I think this is also key. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. The next one to answer the first question is Stephan Neugebauer.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to give you some perspectives from road transport. So road transport is going for electrification, as many other sectors. And now the question is, how much electricity do we need for a highly electrified road transport? And we worked on a study for this with different scenarios, but what you can take away is that for highly electrified road system,
So I'm not sure whether we didn't lose the connection to Stephan right now. So should
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Stephan. However, we can't see you now. The picture was frozen for a short while, but I hope it will be fine right now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So how much electricity do we need for the highly electrified road transport system? Around about 50% of the today's produced electricity overall in Europe will be needed for road transport in the future, in addition to the today's production. So we need this amount of electricity. Then we need a charging infrastructure at home for the passenger cars, at work where they are parked, and at public, at highways, also for trucks, and at commercial areas. And then if we have this charging infrastructure, we have an issue with the peak load. And this is very, very critical. And so I think there are many discussions around the peak load. In UK, I heard that there are plans to limit the charging time. I think this is not acceptable for mobility of our society, but for sure to direct the charging time by price or by smart charging is acceptable. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephan. And the next one would be Thomas Novak to answer the first question on how to get from promise to practice in Europe. So please, floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. That's a bold question to be answered in 2 minutes. So I represent the other part of the demand side, or the third actually, after big industry, vehicles, and now we're looking at heating. Normally we present heat pumps as a solution that can provide green and efficient heating and cooling to end consumers and thus providing comfort. But in this context, I would like to highlight the fact that heat pumps in combination with storage are also a flexibility provision technology that help to balance the electric grid. And if I may add a small different opinion than Peter's, I think we have good ideas of what to do with waste electrons, because we can store them in building cores, we can store them in water tanks, in thermal batteries in case, we can store them in electric batteries. So there is an opportunity available that is at the moment not used fully. And one of the reasons is that in many jurisdictions across Europe, flexibility is not yet given a value. And not giving flexibility a value means that we are losing out on potential new business models. And these new business models would actually help to balance the grid and to address the point that Stephan made, that there may be peaks and shortages. And this will be a useful addition. And I have a direct question to Katharina, maybe she can answer that, because we have a third electricity market design directive that is due for transposition since last year, 31st of December 2020. And many member states, I think it's still the majority of member states, have not transposed that directive. I would really like to see that the Commission puts a bit of a finger on them and says, guys, you have agreed that this is supposed to happen. Now make it happen, because otherwise these new business models will not occur. And you can see what's happening in jurisdictions like the UK, where there is Octopus Energy doing this, what I'm just saying. In the Nordics, there is Nord Pool. And all of these, if we would translate that to all Europe, we would have a more stable system with the use of heat pump technologies and storage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's up to Gerard to be the last one replying to the question. So Gerard, go ahead.
Thank you. Being last gives me a chance to sum up some of the things, to integrate them. I would like to go from the EC's energy efficiency first principle. I think this is really sums the issue up, because first, most electric appliances are really efficient. So going to electricity, going for deep electrification really, really helps. And also electricity can be produced in really large quantities. However, space is the final frontier. So we don't have sufficient space for abundant energy, but we have to be very, very efficient with energy and thus with space. And thus, we have to apply this overarching principle in system planning, and we have to deal with two things. The renewables will be mainly wind and solar, and we have to deal with their variable infeed. And also, we have to accept that some sectors need molecules, and we have to bring this all together in our system planning approach. And system planning means, when we have lots of renewables, to make best use of those renewables, and when we do not have renewables, to manage the time with good solutions. And this brings directly to us to the solutions. Making best use of renewables when we have more than we need for the time being means we will have lots of short-term storage in the system. I think heat pumps, heating, electric vehicles, there are many short-term storage systems that will come up, and the long-term storage element will be H2 and electrolyzers put using electricity for H2, and making a big comprehensive plan out of this and a design that actually works is really important. And I think the first thing that we need is more understanding between the different sectors, and that is why ENTSO-E also published the system planning approach, which is called, what's it called? The system planning approach, and we have to understand each other. And I think that is the key. And from that on, we can design a system and also give policymakers ideas on how to improve the future system. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. So now there is time for the questions from the audience. Having looked at the screen, the first one, which I would like to ask is, from your point of view, how can industry and new technologies contribute to sector integration? So maybe we start with Peter this time and continue with Mary, Stephan and Thomas. So Peter, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting question. And of course, we already use in industry a lot of molecules, be it hydrogen, or we produce on the other side a lot of other molecules like ammonia or methanol, etc., etc. So we have in the industry some experience with the use of molecules, mostly as a raw material. Part of it is already used as an energy carrier, and I think this can be extended. But again, this needs development, this needs innovation, this needs a lot of improvements in known technologies, and I think in the future there will be an opportunity for more use of molecules in the industry, replacing other types of fuels. But I think we need some time to make this happen, to make this possible, and to make this competitive to existing technologies.
Thank you, Peter. May I ask Marie to answer also this question?
Yeah, delighted to. I mean, there's also a question in the commentary which almost answers it for you, because it points out what Acer pointed out, that using grid enhancing technologies can reduce by several times the cost of addressing grid congestion and developing our grids. And it could also deliver solutions much more quickly. So I don't think, I think everybody knows the technologies that are out there. There's a significant body of work and reports that show how much technology can reduce congestion, increase capacity in our grids, avoid the need for new overhead infrastructure, in some cases defer it in others. I think the question is more, why are we not seeing these technologies being adopted, and what are the changes we need in regulation, and what are the changes we need in incentives that will either encourage or ensure that we are using technology that is available in the best possible way for serving our customers. And I think that's where, again, Acer have published this very good position paper which recognizes the need for this. And when you look at regulatory models around Europe and around the world, it's easy to see the things that correlate between regulatory models and fast adoption of technology. So we see things like benefit sharing that they have in the UK. That's certainly encouraged fast adoption of technology. That's a reasonably straightforward regulation change. To make maybe more radical is introducing competition in transmission. We've certainly seen that in South America. That has been really instrumental in fostering the most cost-effective solutions, again, delivering fast solutions and delivering them more economically. So I think the question really should also be, why are we not using technology? There's plenty of technology out of there. There's plenty of proven technologies. There's technologies that are in the early stages maybe, but they can come through over the next couple of years. So I'd encourage everyone to think more about how we can adopt these technologies faster.
Thank you, Marie. So now a quick answer from Stephan related to new technologies. And of course, road transport is among those who are in focus. So maybe if we don't have Stephan, then I would like to invite Thomas now to answer.
Yes, thank you. I can be rather quick. I will leave the grid discussion to all of you that are more competent on that. And I would also say that we can leave the molecules to industry, because for heating, we have great solutions that can decarbonize heating and cooling with efficient electrification. And as I represent the heat pump industry, you will expect me to say it's heat pumps, but they are really good. We have calculated the potential of around 3.5 terawatt hours of electricity balancing potential if flexibility is given a value and if markets can play their role and make it attractive to provide this flexibility to the grid. System integration starts at the location of use, in fact, because if you think of an electric building that has photovoltaic on the roof or in the neighborhood, has a battery, is connected to a car, vehicle to grid charging is coming. I don't know, maybe Stephan will say something to that. With a 100 kilowatt hour battery in your car, you can actually bring the building only with electricity over the night, maybe even over the next day. With the thermal storage, you can add the second day. So buildings are ready today to bridge 1 to 2 days of very little sunshine and very little wind.
Thank you. Now Stephan is back. So Stephan, please go ahead. Okay, so we might be struggling with some technical problems. Anyway, having a look at the monitor with the questions, then we have here the second one, which is how a more integrated energy system planning can contribute to the decarbonization of the power system and increase social and environmental welfare. So maybe we start with Antonella.
Thank you. Well, I believe that what is happening now with grid planning is that there is a constant competition between hydrogen, gases, and electricity. This is not very good. So a more integrated system planning where the demand side, large consumers and industry are fully embedded in the process, I think it's a requirement. I refer in particular to two elements. One is that we are learning that more and more industries actually don't want hydrogen, but they want electricity. Of course, there are some that do want molecules. But what we believe to be the case that all the heavy industry would want hydrogen, this is not materializing. So this put an additional massive pressure on the need to build electricity grids, which obviously it's not easy. At the same time, there are an increasing number of very large consumers that are moving into a 24/7, which is based on physical delivery and not on exchanges of certificates. And so we need to look at the system on how this increasing number of large consumers can provide support and flexibility into the system while the system evolves. Also, I believe that system integration is looked at in a still quite conservative way. The challenges that the energy system as a whole is going to face in the coming decade, I'm talking about the next 10 years, are massive. In particular, impact of climate change on energy infrastructures will add additional strain that are absolutely not modeled. And therefore, we will need to see a relocation of assets and demand to access clean electricity. And then we can decide what is clean and what is not clean. And this will change the entire pattern of demand and supply. So this, if you do it in a coherent way, will allow also better communication towards consumers and better involvement of consumers. This will lead to more support and better and optimal use of resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Lloyd, a quick response from ENTSO-G.
Yeah, thank you. I think, first of all, technology neutrality is key. Some will want electrons, others will want molecules, but I think we need to enhance competition in the energy sector that will be beneficial for everyone. For what regards infrastructure planning, I think the integrated scenarios are a very good starting point. There's, of course, more we can do. Take our interlink model, for instance. We are developing a methodology to assess how gas and electricity projects contribute to the decarbonization of the other systems, but also how it contributes to security of supply. And our interlink model allows us to consider infrastructure investment options over different energy carriers. And by doing so, basically this ensures that efficient and economic investment decisions can be made, which is clearly in the interest of social and environmental welfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Gerard, the last one to respond to this question. Just a very brief response. We are really running out of time, so thank you.
I think working with the other sectors and making best use of all the options they have. This is also the link that we need for non-wire solutions, as we're often talked about, to use as little infrastructure. To be efficient also reduces the need for infrastructure and generation. But I would also like to add here that interconnection is a very efficient way to make best use of the renewables across Europe. That is also part of the future interconnected integrated system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. So now we have numerous questions on the screen. However, there is just the last one, which I would like to tackle. It's from Christian Kier to Marie. Acer issued a position this month pointing out that the profitability of building new grids is several times higher than applying grid-enhancing technologies and existing grids, providing the same benefits. What needs to change in terms of incentives? So, Mary, it's the last question. Also, please just make it short. But however, we have so many likes that I think it's necessary to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and be brief. I think, when we look at what needs to change, an awful lot of it is going to be around the incentives and remuneration for the transmission system operators and distribution system operators. Maybe the signals are not right today. So there are different models out there. I mentioned them earlier on that can really encourage the adoption of grid enhancing technologies. And these include benefit sharing, where the system operator shares in the better value, or if you like, the cost differential between the new technology and traditional alternative. I think also maybe incentives around the timing of delivery of infrastructure as well. So rewards for delivering solutions faster and maybe penalties for delivering it late. And finally, I think, we have to look to the distribution system. We see a lot more adoption of innovation and technology on the distribution system than we do at transmission. And I certainly believe one of the reasons for that is to do with the level of competition we see at distribution. So I think we need to ask and answer the question about what can competition do for our transmission grids, and how can competition enhance and foster faster adoption and better solutions all around for our customers.
Thank you, Mary. So I can see more questions on the screen, and I think it would be worth organizing a specific workshop on this for those who were not answered today. However, as the session has its limited time, now it's my role to return back to our keynote speaker, Katarina, and ask you, Katarina, what are the key takeaways for you from this discussion today?
Many thanks, and many thanks to the good questions and good answers. Very rich, very varied contributions. I will make 4 points from my very personal takeaways, and I will build those around the word of urgency that I think Marie mentioned, we are in a situation where we don't have the luxury of time. So to succeed, we need, number one, we need people with us. So we need to be sure that people know what we are doing, why we are doing, and we need to make sure that also all the proposals are affordable to the people who ultimately always will have to pay them. So that's one, people. Second, what I sense, not in this discussion today, but what I feel often when approached by stakeholders is that everybody tries to convince us that my technology, my sector is the solution. That's not the case. We need all good decarbonizing technologies. There is no one silver bullet. So we need to make sure that we, instead of, let's say I use the word fight, we cooperate and we acknowledge the merits of our neighbor, our competing technology, etc. Because that's the only way, again, to have this system approach and succeed. Then third, so again, was not very much discussed today, but the future is very uncertain. So if you look at forecasts or plans that were made 30 years ago, I think you would be laughing. I mean, they are more funny than real. And just as one example, how many of us would have known 20 years ago that our mobile phones are now more powerful than our computers of the time? So that's why what I think here is that we must not get lost in perfect planning of the future, because the future will be different from what we see today. And we must then be sure that what we implement is good, maybe not perfect, but at least is good and decarbonizes as fast as possible. And here my last point then is that grids, electricity grids, are often, maybe not always, but very often, a good bet today. I personally feel that it is less of a risk, less of a damage if we had one more link too much than if we have one link too little in the electricity system, because the one link too little would lead to dramatic consequences. So I think at this point of time with the electrification, etc., electrification need, electricity grid is a relatively safe bet to start from the investments. So those were my very personal conclusions or reactions to the very rich discussion we heard today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. So now I would like to wrap up, or try to wrap up all that what was said. And I would like to thank all the panelists and our keynote speaker for a very fruitful discussion. For me, the key is that achieving net zero emissions requires a wide range of actions from all sectors of society, and that energy efficiency is key to achieve the EU climate neutrality objectives. What I heard from you as the speakers, several times it was mentioned that there are some barriers, that we need to be focused on large-scale infrastructure and its usage, which should be efficient. We should keep building cross-sectoral links in the way that we will take no-regret steps. ENTSO-E could be understood as one of the leaders of decarbonization future, and together with EU DSO entity enabling this change, and that this power system is now in the center of gravity of other technologies. That's why it will always stay technologically neutral. Also, it was mentioned that the future is electric, and that there will be new fuels used, and the system planning with the best use of renewables is also one of the key focus points for the future. And what Katarina said, I would fully underline that ENTSO-E is behaving according to very strict rules, so we always need to have one line extra. It's our N-1 criteria, and we will stick to that forever. And regarding the planning, I agree it's necessary to plan things with what we know, but try to strike the right decisions. And also the sectors, they should cooperate on this common basis created by the grid. And I also believe that it will be not a competition, but it will be a kind of symphony played together. And having said that, I would like to now give the floor back to Sonia. And thank you for this nice session. And it was a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zbyněk. Thank you also to Ms. Siko Magni and also to all our panelists for sharing their views on such an excellent debate. I am quite struck by the debate, in fact, Zbyněk, especially on the technology side. Maybe the future lies in our children. Maybe we shouldn't ourselves imagine the future because, in fact, it's the children's future. So, yeah, the points of Katharina are well made, that we should allow things to happen and not try to constrain it too much by even our own limitations. So I don't know if you think that's such a good idea.
I fully agree. Having 4 children, I also will ensure that they will be allowed to do stuff as they need, and that their future will be fine.
Thank you, Zbyněk. Thank you very much for that interesting interlude. So now I would like to move to our poll, just to remind you that we would really like to hear from you. We would like to find out what you believe are the trends and the scenarios in terms of having the most impact for 2050. And you have there a sequence of options. And please do pick the trend or scenario that you most jives with you. So now we would like to take a short break, and I would like you to return, if possible, for between 11:55. Thank you. Welcome back to ENTSO-E 2021 conference. I would now like to move to Dublin and to Liam Ryan, the Vice Chair of our board. Hello, Liam. Good morning to you. It's just still morning, just about, and we're now interested to hear your next panel on unlocking demand-side flexibility. Thank you.
Good morning, Sonia, and welcome from Dublin. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning, and look, it's a great session so far. So looking at the lineup of speakers that we have for this session, I think we'll actually have another great discussion. And listening to the earlier conversations, flexibility and utilising the grid, both distribution and transmission, is really important, and also unlocking the demand side participation are really critical elements. So I'm not going to take away from the speech. Let's actually open up the discussion. Let's move on to the real element why we're here today. So good morning, everybody, and welcome. And as Sonia said, my name is Liam Ryan, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of ENTSO-E. In this session, we would like to analyse and discuss the challenges and opportunities related to the transmission and distribution interfaces, and how to unlock demand-side flexibility, thereby putting the energy citizen at the centre of this transition. Europe's energy sector is shifting from fossil fuel dominated and supply-centric models to a clean, digitised and electrified consumer-centric system with many distributed sources. On the generation side, there will be a share of wind and solar PV generation, which will reach 80% of the final electricity demand in 2050. The fluctuations of renewable generation will be significant, some over short periods of time, while others over longer periods, challenging our thinking, challenging our system stability, and affecting the energy available for end users in all sectors. On the demand side, new load will need to be integrated. This will be driven by direct electric demand increasing, and that will be up to 47% compared to when we look back to 2018 levels. And this will be driven by new technologies like the electrification or the uptake of new technologies, electric vehicles and heat pumps. But we need to actually look at the flexibilities that these technologies can be used when they're deployed across the actual system in association with smart meters to allow consumers to become more active in the market directly or indirectly via aggregators and contribute to the overall system needs. In parallel, alternative supply models, such as local energy communities, will also need to develop. And these will further challenge the role of the coordination between the system operators, the distribution system operators, and all grid users. So I'm really, I think it's a really exciting topic, and I think this is at the heart of the transition that we need to do. But before we actually get into the discussion with the panel members, I'm really privileged here today to introduce our keynote speaker. So please allow me to introduce Mr. Vincenzo Ranieri, President of the European DSO entity, the recently established Association of European Distribution System Operators. Mr. Ranieri, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Good morning, everyone, dear colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today to open this interesting and much needed debate on the active role of customers within the energy ecosystem. To this regard, let me first thank personally Mr. Lafay for this opportunity, and also to congratulate with the ENTSO-E team and Sonia in particular for the organization of such simulating event. We are absolutely well aware, and we've been listening during the previous speech that the energy sector and the whole society are amid an unprecedented transformation. We are moving into a changing of system whose pace of transition and innovation introduced are probably comparable only to the industrial revolution of the 18th and 19th century. By the way, with respect to our predecessors, we have developed a greater awareness of the implication of such epical change on every dimension of our community, be it economic, cultural, and even environmental. Furthermore, we have new responsibility since we have new huge challenges ahead, in particular the climate change that we have mentioned many times, but I deem that it's never enough. And of course, the consequent ambitions to achieve a fully decarbonized society within 2050. We know as well that Europe and we strongly believe that Europe has the organizational and technological capabilities to drive this transition. The European power system structure, as well as regulatory and legislative context, are evolving in coherence with this transition to sustain the integration of distributed energy resources that, Liam, you were mentioning, even to foster the birth and involvement of emerging stakeholders, such as the energy communities, to protect the community itself from the risk of global warming, while ensuring always a safe, reliable, and affordable electrical services. We are indeed firsthand experiencing the evolution of the traditional linear model of power system into a distributed model, where the distribution system operators play an even more key and central role, and where cooperation and coordination among all stakeholders, and I would say in particular between TSOs and DSOs in this complex ecosystem is becoming essential. Looking back at the past, we can easily recognize how the concept itself of customers is completely changed over the last 20 years. From consumers to prosumers, in some cases, to active participant of the energy market capable of driving energy actions whose choices can really interfere with the demand and supply mechanism and require, of course, technical and systemic adjustment. The participation of European citizens to the energy market, I would say, is a common goal of all European citizens. And that's a point that I want to underline, and I will go back later on this. This is a really common goal that implies the actions of every single stakeholders of the ecosystem. And to make it effective, really, there are at least 3 strategic lines in my advice we have been working on, and we have to keep on working. The first one is the technological innovation and product digitalization, which means implementing cutting-edge technologies. For instance, let's think to the digital metering system as core elements to realize smart grids and interconnected assets. The second strategic pillar is the process digitalization and data interoperability, which means on one hand, redesigning business as usual processes, and on the other hand, simplifying the integration and the communication along the entire electricity supply chain. The third one that is extremely important as well is the effective awareness of the communities on their role, their power and their tools they have at their disposal. Let me make an example. By deploying the smart metering, we have provided the electrical system with what it is needed to make people part of the electrical market. And we are modifying processes and services to boost, for instance, demand-side response on the participation to flexibility services. But to really achieve this result, we need effective collaboration between all stakeholders. We need advocacy, we need to involve people. We need, as DSOs, to open our grids to every contribution in a participatory approach in what it is called a platform model, while the infrastructure itself is the real enabler and catalyzer of innovation and change. To this regard, to manage this platform model and to this complexity, multilateralism is not an option, but the only way forward, both for us as DSOs, as well as for all the stakeholders, to really accelerate the transition, to unlock the power of customers, and to build a bridge towards the future of a European energy system. Since its birth in June 2021, the EU DSO entity that I have the honor to chair embraced this attitude, starting a path of dialogue and exchange with the Commission, with regulators, with all the associations starting from ENTSO-E to share our vision and priorities, where DSOs can act as a glue of the electricity value chain, creating values and opportunities for the sake of the future generation. And in this respect, the establishment of the entity marks a sort of turning point in the European energy system renewal process with respect to definition of European network codes and guidelines for the implementation of the acts related to clean energy for the European package, and in promoting priorities for grid investment and digitization program. Within this context, the entity must represent and is representing the collective interest of all DSOs, the small, medium, and large, because as we have said, all European citizens require the same dignity, no matter then the DSO is serving them is small, medium, large. And the entity in this respect, regardless scale and resources, must act as a unique voice with all the main actors of the European energy scenario. This is what we are doing with ENTSO-E, working day by day to contribute to the network codes and to define standard and guidelines while nurturing our common knowledge. European power systems are at the forefront of facing these challenges on the electricity future that represents the global ambition for a more sustainable planet. This is the moment to stand up to a great responsibility we all have for European citizens and for final customer. An opportunity to catch and for sure the goal that we all have to achieve. And I'm absolutely confident that we are going to achieve it. Thank you, Liam.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri. That is an absolutely excellent speech, and I couldn't agree more with respect to the fact that we have to make sure that we can actually unlock, and all parts of the ecosystem need to work together to achieve the transition that we need to actually do over the next period in time. So I think that speech really sets us up well for the following discussion. And now if I could move on to introduce the panel's people on the panel for the next session. So first of all, I would like to actually introduce Valborga Himmelberger, CEO of the Association of Solar Powered Europe. So welcome. I would also actually like to welcome Guillaume Lefrido, the Energy Policy Officer at BIC, the European Consumer Organization. I would also like to welcome Wolfgang Urbansitz, the Vice President of the Council of European Energy Regulators. I would also like to welcome Dirk van Sinjan, President of RESCORP, the European Federation of Renewable Energy Cooperatives. I would also like to welcome Michael Villa, Mikael, the Executive Director of SmartEN, the European Business Association of Digital and Decentralized Energy Solutions. I would also like to welcome Jérôme Laplage, Chair of the Electricity Committee for the European Federation of Energy Traders. And also I would like to actually welcome my colleague, Damien Cortez, the chair of our Transmission and Distribution Interface Steering Group. So a really highly distinguished group we actually have here in front of us today, folks. So I'm going to actually kick off with the very first question, which I'm going to put to all the panelists. And it's really, what barriers must we overcome to ensure it all binds together while ensuring we are putting the customer at the center of the transition that we're actually going through? And if I could actually start, first of all, with yourself, Valborga, that would be great. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Liam. Thanks very much for having us here today. Solar is very much the power of the people, so I'm happy that we can contribute to this discussion today. Putting the customer, or I would rather say the electricity consumer, at the center of the decarbonization is really key. We need to take people along in this transition. And talking about, before I'm talking about the barriers, let me just mention that there's a huge solar potential. So the rooftops we have in Europe, all these roofs, these beautiful roofs out there, which do not need to use any additional land or grounds, the potential is huge. We could power 25%, so one quarter of today's electricity consumption if we would just use the roofs we have. When we look at the commercial and the industrial sector, what we could unleash by 2030 is a flabbergasting 400 gigawatt of electricity production, as opposed to the 93 gigawatt we have today, so huge potential. But indeed, there's a couple of barriers and we need to unlock these. By the way, what I should also mention is that it's not only the electricity production potential, but we can also very much unlock private financing, private investment. So it's not just about the state having to look at what they can, what the member states can do, but there is a lot we can do to unlock the private investments and engage customers. So barriers. Obviously, one thing which has been discussed already in the earlier session is that we need to use the sources of flexibility for the system which can be provided. So by powering directly the increasingly electrified uses in the buildings, so really using what you can produce yourself, but also providing direct demand side response. So we do think that without really engaging the customers in all these topics, there will be no achievement of the Green Deal. It will not happen. That's very clear. So with the rooftop solar PV prices increasingly below also residential electricity tariffs, ensuring additional economic benefits to these consumers is key, and we need to really make sure that they're not subject to the price hikes which we see today. We lack a vision for consumers of solar. So we have targets for electrolysis, we have targets for offshore wind, but not for solar PV rooftops, which can contribute largely to this discussion and to the transition. So we must really have a true strategy to deploy solar on rooftops. It has to be easy for consumers. I'm very happy that we have Dirk here today as well, and Jean Lofredo from Bouygues. It has to be easy for consumers. That means, for example, that renovations need to make sure that you also, when you renovate, put solar on your roofs. You want to stop me because I'm over time already?
No, it's okay. I'm just talking about the key element, which is really opening up the regulatory side, and I think that's really important, and making sure that we have the rules actually in place. And Joe, I'd welcome your thoughts on this.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Could I just finish with my two last points? So we just think it's too much complexity. We need to really see that this complexity is reduced and implement the frameworks we already have in the clean energy package for self-consumption. So I think this is very important. Thanks.
Okay. So if I could actually move to yourself, Guillaume, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, very, very quickly. The first barrier is that consumers still cannot engage in demand-side flexibility in many member states. We have this project which is called ClearX that we're doing together with some of our members in Eastern European countries. And what our members discovered is that in the countries covered in the project, consumers still cannot sign up for dynamic price contracts or for aggregation contracts. And the reason is that the relevant measures in the electricity directive were not yet implemented by those member states. So the first thing actually is implementing the electricity directive, enabling consumers to sign up for dynamic price contracts and enabling them to sign up for aggregation contracts so that they can engage in flexibility. Without these, they cannot engage at all. Second point that needs to be remembered is that consumers are not energy experts. I mean, every time I talk to my friends about dynamic price contracts and I explain them that they could save money if they're able to shift their consumption, they always tell me, yes, but I mean, how can I know when prices are high and when they're low? And they always make the same remark. I mean, yes, I mean, even if I know when prices are low, I mean, I don't have enough time during the day to manually shift my consumption. And it's a fair point. I mean, we'll all have better things to do than manually shifting our consumption. So automation actually is very, very important. But here, I mean, for consumers to be confident in engaging with automation, there are two things that are very important. The first one is ease of use of the appliance. These appliances should be designed in a way that it's very easy to use for all consumers, even those in digital divides. Second thing is about trust, that by relying on those appliances, our needs will be satisfied. When I return back home from work and I plug my electric vehicle, I should know that by 8 in the morning, the day after, the vehicle will be fully charged, and I should have this guarantee. Giving this guarantee of that our needs will be satisfied and ease of use are fundamental for consumer engagement. If we don't do that, then flexibility will remain something for the energy nerds like ourselves on this panel.
Yeah, Jeremy, I agree. I think it's really important that we make it easy, we make it very accessible for people as we're actually coming forward. Wolfgang, I would welcome your thoughts.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be here. It's a quite broad question, to be honest. I mean, how to bring all together and to involve the consumers and customers. Now, I will give 3 examples, but already this starting point of our discussion shows that we have quite some barriers, and I think we have to overcome all of them. Just to start is, nevertheless, I mean, it's a common knowledge that the system has already become more volatile, and this will go on. Just to mention, now the new program of the new German government states that not only the phase out of nuclear power plants by next year, but also the coal phase out by 2030, and 80% of renewables in Germany in the electricity network by 2030. So this means we have an acceleration of the whole development, which means it's even more important to think about the barriers and overcome these barriers. I would like to give 3 examples. First of all, I think it's very important to note that it's all about data. And I think within the industry, the barrier to be tackled is data and information exchange. And in the past, it was in a relatively static system easier for us, for the TSOs, to get a good and stable picture of the grid. And with all the new market participants and the decentralization of the system, this has changed. And therefore, I think at all levels, whether it's TSOs, but also DSOs, it is absolutely necessary to collect all the data and to have a coordination between the TSOs and DSOs. And therefore, I welcome also the DSO entity, because the DSOs by this can work together with the TSOs, and I'm very confident that the incentivization and the intense cooperation of ENTSO-E with the newly established DSO entity will help to bring that forward. The second point is really to really involve the customers. And it's again has something to do with customer participation with the access to the data for the customers. Just before smart metering was mentioned, and I also believe and I'm convinced that a smart meter and data exchange is absolutely necessary. And I see also, for instance, in my country, that it is absolutely important not only to install the smart meters, but to make sure that there is an easy kind of data exchange. And we have to work that all the technical, but also legal barriers, especially for the DSOs, we can overcome these barriers and to make sure that by this the customers can be involved, for instance, by aggregators and others. And the third example I would like to give is also something which has to do, of course, with the regulating the whole system, and it's a task, especially also of the regulators. That's the tariff model. I think the tariff model for the network operator has to incentivize the behavior which stabilizes the system, and an active consumer participation needs to be valued. So we have to make sure that the network tariffs give the right incentives to all market participants, so that the market participants also can support the grid stability. So these are my introductional remarks, and I'm happy to discuss these points among with other points, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Dirk, if I could call on you maybe to get your thoughts on the opening question.
Yes, first of all, I hear customer, I hear electricity consumer. We like to talk about citizens because it's the citizens that the clean energy package wanted to put in the center of the energy transition. And I'm also happy to announce that the solution of most of the problems, of all the obstacles that were mentioned, might be the energy communities, the renewable energy communities, because we can guarantee that citizens allow new wind turbines in their neighborhood, at least if they are owned by the energy communities. So we can work on we think that the energy transition will only succeed if the citizens are taken along, also the vulnerable ones. And this is also one of our main topics. We work on energy poverty. When it's about the integration of all these renewables, I will give you the example of my own cooperative in Flanders, EcoPower. We started 30 years ago. We now have 64,000 members. We produce about 90 million kilowatt hours, and we supply our members with about 80 million kilowatt hours. For the moment, we are the cheapest supplier in Flanders, even with the crisis now, because we produce more than we supply. And we can decide upon our own prices. We don't depend on the 20% of electricity that is on the market in Belgium. The rest is PPAs between big consumers and the big producers. So actually, it's very good that we put the citizen in the center of the energy transition. And this should also mean we should question, like the cascade system. Why is it that the more you consume, the cheaper the electricity you have? This goes rather far, but it's until now it was the citizen who, for instance, the whole take the example of Belgium again, who is supporting the transition to renewables. 80% of the cost is for the small consumers. Industry, they don't contribute it. No, instead they get subsidies to get even lower electricity price. So if we really want to put the citizen in the center, we have to revise all these things because we need their support. Otherwise, it won't happen. I'll leave it to this.
No, Dirk, I agree. I think, I think he called out really well. Even like the citizen has to be at the center of this transition that we're actually doing. And Miguel, if you could maybe give me your thoughts about how we can maybe make some of this work as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's extremely important to put the consumer at the center, but it's not enough if these consumers does not contribute to make the system more efficient. And we see this risk in some legislative provisions also proposed very recently by the European Commission. So really, this is an extremely important aspect, consumer-centric system, but enabling them to participate and contribute to the overall optimization of the system. Just prosumer business models that are aiming at an energy independence or isolation are not the beneficial ones. Indeed, in order to avoid the barriers to this active participation, it was already mentioned by some others, price signals. Consumers need to receive price signals. Now there are too many blurring effects from taxes, or also tariffs that are not cost effective. So this is a very first important barriers that needs to be eliminated. And then incentives to the participation of all end users to all electricity markets and mechanisms. If we don't have markets that are open to end users, all types, including the small ones below 1 megawatt, then we are having a major problem to incentivize and reward them to unleash their flexibility potential. Related to that, markets fragmentation. We need really to avoid to have a multiplication of markets that are very national, very narrow, very regional, with their own rules, with their own criteria, with their own requirements, because this will not enable service providers like aggregators to be competitive and to really create a real market in the energy sector. And then trust. It was mentioned before by Jaume. Yes, digitalization is going to increase. Consumers will not need indeed to know all the details and to activate to a certain moment in time. This can be done automatically, but indeed an increase in cybersecurity is going to be extremely important. And market players will be are keen to indeed to be compliant to cybersecurity requirements, of course, in a proportional way. You cannot put on the same level the new aggregators with incumbents with regard to the cybersecurity requirement. And then skills of not just of the installers, that needs to deploy and install these new resources, but also of developers, of project developers, of property developers that needs to be really aware of how a PV should communicate with a storage or a smart charger of an electric vehicles, and how this installation and this deployment can help consumers to be active and not just isolate themselves, and also link these capabilities with financing schemes and also rewarding scheme to reduce the cost of the investment for the deployment of these resources and really reward them for become active in this interaction with the system.
Yeah, Michael, I very much agree. I think it's really important that, we actually have the energy citizen at the center, but they're actually providing the services to us, and those services are very clearly supported and the right mechanisms put in place to give the right incentives around it. And if I may actually pull in now, Jerome, if you can maybe give me your thoughts on some of this as well.
Sure, and thank you, Liam, for this question, and like a lot of good points already brought forward by the other panelists. As a trading representative, of course, we look at this from a market perspective, and markets we're like fully aware, just a tool to make sure that that supply and demand are matched. We think it's a good tool. But it's just a tool in a way, and demand is already part of the market. Like, it's one of the two main elements of the market. Though in most places, indeed, like, this demand is like completely aggregated for the moment and not necessarily reactive. So the question for us is really, how do we disaggregate this demand for those who want it? And I think that that first point is important because many consumers will continue to want to rely on like other like third party to make sure that they have certain stability in their price provision, etc. So they will continue to want to be shielded from price volatility in the short term. Others, and those who can and want to do it, will want to be more active, like with their production, with their consumption in the market. And for that, there's a number of key elements that they will need to be provided with. First, they need actually knowledge of what they get into, and that's really an important point. And that was like mentioned by Jaume, also like an experience with dialogue with friends. We see that it's not necessarily that easy to understand how all this is working. Of course, a regulatory framework for everybody who wants to be active, to be able to be active. Technical ability to act on the market as well. We talked about smart meters, smart appliances, etc. One thing that is very important is transparency on prices. That's really key. And the last element I would say is actually for those prices to mean something. So if we have continuous price interventions in the market, if we don't let the market like say something about the fundamentals it's driven by, then like reacting to prices will not be meaningful for the energy transition. So like kind of like summary of those introductory remarks, I think for us, it's really key to get consumers and disaggregated consumers more active in the market. That will one of the keys to a successful energy transition. For that, we need the framework, be it regulatory, technical, to allow that. But we need to keep in mind that we roll out this exposure to market prices of consumers in a way that allows those consumers like to do that only when they want and they can do it, because otherwise we end up with price interventions like we're seeing now in the event of high market prices. So let's make sure we don't decide for consumers what they want, but we let them decide what they can and wish to do.
Yeah, I think it's we really need to be asking the questions and then providing the solutions which address those issues and making sure we move towards transition. Damien, if you could give me your opening remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Thank you. And maybe as in closing these opening remarks, I would like to remind why this is such an important issue for unlocking the energy transition in Europe. Is that as system operators, what is clear is that a carbon neutral power system will be based in renewables, and a very important part of the renewables will be by definition what we call weather dependent. So the main issue is how do we have the flexibilities in the system that will compensate when we will not have as much sun, as much wind as the energy system will require. And distributed flexibilities will be one of the keys to unlock this future. One of the keys, because just to give a rough idea, if you take an electric vehicle with a battery, if you take a very, very low assumption that this vehicle can inject 1 kilowatt into the system, 1 million electric vehicles means 1,000 gigawatts, that 1,000 megawatts, 1 gigawatt that can come into the system for a short duration. But this is in the scale of the kind of research that we will probably be able to need in order to compensate for what we call this future weather dependent system. And what will be for us, it is a very, very important issue moving forward. And what will be the key barriers? How will be the key to unlock this future? There will be several of them, but the main one to start with will be what we call cooperation. Cooperation between all system operators that will be involved in unlocking this future. If you take 1,000 megawatts will have an impact, even if it's a sum of very small things, into the European system as a whole. But each one of these megawatts will have an impact on the distribution network they are located. So we need to find ways to cooperate between all system operators in order to make it happen, in a way that it also gives the most value to the final consumer, about the best way to use this flexibility that is going to give the most value to them. And as John mentioned at the beginning, I think it's very, very important. It has to be as simple as possible, particularly for the small participants, if we want it to happen. So in wrap up, we will need cooperation, we will need market mechanisms to unlock the value, and we will need also ways to make it as simple as possible to the final consumer. And this, again, will be one of the keys to unlock this energy transition for the future.
Thanks to everybody, and thanks, Damien. Some really good questions coming in. So I'm just going to kick off with the very first question, which is how to incentivize active consumers with dynamic pricing while shielding them from disproportionate price volatility. And Valborg, if I could ask you for your opinions on this, please.
Yeah, that's a very tricky one indeed, and I think there's no straightforward answer to it. I mean, on the one hand, it is really key that we have dynamic pricing signals in order to unlock the flexibility we all need, and then that's what Damien just confirmed, that we need all the distributed flexibility we can get. But I also would very much support some of the other thoughts. That we cannot oblige consumers. So there needs to be different options, I would say, you know, dynamic price offers, time of use network tariffs, participation to flexibility markets. So, and depending a little bit on the type of consumer and depending on the extent to which they can be exposed to price volatility, there should be different possibilities, differentiating between residential consumers, SME, and large businesses. So, and maybe one other point is that consumer information will be crucial. That's also one of the points some of you made already, to really engage the consumers and make them more knowledgeable about markets, about how they can contribute to the energy transition. And in the end, we also need, I mean, one thing is clear, we need to remove all the barriers to flexibility.
I agree. Jeremy, have you got, what's your view on this?
Well, the first thing is information. I mean, repeating what other people said. What the current crisis with energy prices told us is that many consumers did not know that they were exposed to wholesale prices, and I mean this is a problem. And I'm not only referring to consumers on dynamic price tariffs. I'm also referring to consumers on variable price tariffs, where the price remains, you know, the same during the day and changes maybe every month or every quarter to take stock of the evolution in wholesale markets. So the first thing that needs to be done is giving consumers clear information about the potential risks. And second thing that should be done, suppliers should actually seek the active consent of the consumer before switching them to a dynamic price tariff. Because I mean, like, it's really important to be sure that the consumers really know, like, you know, what they are signing up for, which, like, you know, as recent evolutions, like, you know, told us, like, you know, it's not always the case. But second thing is advice. I mean, many consumers are not used to use energy flexibly. If we want consumers to engage in demand side flexibility, in dynamic price tariffs, and to benefit from them, you really need to explain them what they should do to benefit from these offers. So, like, you know, suppliers should tell consumers that they should purchase, for example, a smart heat pump or a charging point for the electric vehicle that is capable of smart charging, because they may not know that. I mean, like, it should be told really clearly to the consumer. A second thing is, well, the supplier should tell consumers how the appliance will behave so that they control it better. Example, I mean, going back to my example of the electric vehicle, when I return home at 6 p.m. and I plug my electric car, I should know that if I need the car at some point during the night, I should maybe switch to a conventional charging rather than using, like, you know, the standard smart charging, so that I'm sure that my car will be charged when I need that. So, as I said, information really important, and advice fundamental, because otherwise, like, you know, consumers will simply not be comfortable with engaging in dynamic price tariffs.
And just to probably add to that, it's just Jerome, what do you think maybe from a trading perspective that we can actually do around those elements for the end consumer?
Many thanks, Liam. So a few things, like first, like let's make sure we debunk some ideas. Dynamic pricing doesn't mean necessarily that everybody will be pegged to a 15-minute signal. So like it's a very wide reality. And again, it's a question of choice and ability of consumers like to understand what they go for. So if you're able and willing to react to a 15-minute price signal, then great. If not, dynamic pricing can also be over longer periods of time, different types of signals, etc. And as such, so we're like as traders, like rather supportive of dynamic pricing because that's really a way to get the price signal from the wholesale market all the way down to like end users and consumers. So that's really good. There, in terms of how we believe it should work so that like consumers are protected. It's really something that we really insist on is like really information to consumers. Like what we've seen now with high energy prices everywhere in Europe is strong interventions by some governments, and especially the strongest ones are in places where a lot of consumers have signed up for dynamic pricing dynamic pricing contracts without really knowing what they get into. So that's really, for us, that's really a key. That's a way for like volatility in the market as such is not a problem in a way. Like it's a natural reaction of the market that like signals tight elements in the market. And what we see in the current energy, like high energy prices that we have now, we hear a lot about coal prices, gas prices, ETS prices. But there's one element that is missing often from the analysis is the very high demand because of the post-COVID crisis recovery. And understanding how that demand could be also more reactive to energy prices would be great. So again, wide support for that. And for the most vulnerable consumers or industry that is particularly exposed to high energy prices, then yes, there may be a case for interventions, but let's try to like put them away from like wholesale energy prices and tempering with those signals for those who can react to those signals and keep them to tax or budgetary measures, I would say.
Thanks, Jerome. Just I know we're very much caught for time at the moment, and I just want to maybe get one very quick question from the other members of the panel, if I may. So in essence, it's going, which is one of the key questions coming in, what are the implications of a bottom-up community energy model for the electricity grid? And maybe, Damien, if I could start with you. And again, if you could keep it short, it would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. A community-driven energy model could be a way of what I was saying before of simplifying the use of flexibilities for the final consumer. In a community energy, people get together in order to handle their basic needs as a community, but they will be connected to the whole system to get flexibility when they don't have enough energy for their needs, but also to provide flexibility when the system will need it. So this energy community would fit very well in what we at ENTSO-E are calling that the future as a system of systems working together. And this system of systems goes from the European system as a whole, and it could be down to these energy communities. That could be, again, one of the keys to simplify the use of flexibilities for the final consumers, as well as long as they are connected and they work together with the rest of the energy system as a whole. This could be one of the ideas.
Thank you, Damien. Dirk, could I get your views on that, please?
Yeah, so crucial for citizens is that they trust the one who's handling their flexibility, and that's where we come in as energy communities, as energy cooperatives. I already said this. We are preparing ourselves, and we have to take a concrete example. Again, my own cooperative. We have about 1.6% of the Flemish households as a customer. They are also owner of our wind turbines, of our solar panels. Half of them have installed solar panels on their roofs. They are getting a digital meter, so we soon will have to handle what they put on the grid. So and that's an opportunity, and we're preparing ourselves using European research money, Horizon 2020. We have this RESCOP virtual power plant project now, where we also developed the smart box that you have to insert into the digital meter. So we are preparing ourselves to offer the flexibility of our members to the grid. They are buying electrical cars. That's another opportunity. But so we are preparing ourselves. We share the knowledge across Europe among energy cooperatives, and we will team up with whoever. In Flanders, it seems it's rather the TSO than the DSO who will be our partner. In other countries, it will be the DSOs. We have DSOs as members as well. We have about 100 members who are small, very small DSOs. So that's we are preparing ourselves. We will be ready to help the energy transition as much as we can.
And if I could, just maybe very last comment from Wolfgang, if you actually have one very quick comment.
One very quick comment is I think these bottom-up models, community energy models are very important for the awareness of the customers, and therefore they are very important for the whole system with this regard. That's my comment on this.
Thanks, Wolfgang. And Miguel, last comment on this to yourself.
Yeah, the very positive impacts of a bottom-up approach for the grid is an increase of their efficiency. It was also very timely said by Acer this week in a very recent position paper on infrastructure efficiency. Regulation can help and should incentivize the system operators to indeed move from a CapEx to a total approach, which will mean indeed activating and using the resources that are already deployed. So this will increase the efficiency of the infrastructure. To do that, a clear implication is to share data. To make sure that both market players, but also system operators share data, so that indeed there is this kind of sharing to third parties of very relevant information on the network constraints, on the real-time information of the energy mix, on the carbon content. And I would say that TSO are better positioned in that data sharing compared to DSO. And an example is indeed the ENTSO-E transparency platform. But indeed, more information, local data is very much important for service providers like aggregators to really define where it's more profitable to offer and engage their consumers. A way to do that is to use an harmonized European approach, building on standards that already existed by some and already used by some system operators like the SIM IEC 62325 standard, so that indeed data formats are interoperable both for TSO and DSO level, and indeed to enable a very harmonized activation and use of the flexibility resources by all end users.
Thank you, Miguel. If I may, actually, I'd thank all the panel, and I just want to maybe turn to Mr. Ranieri for just maybe his final reflection from the discussion today before I wrap up.
I think that we have been listening very interesting comment and concrete proposal on how really to put the citizens at the center of the energy transition. Basically, the active participation that we are discussing about of citizens have required some bold moves from all the actors of the supply chain, of the energy chain. First of all, we have to make customer more acknowledged about what does it mean, the energy transition, which are the real power that they have in their hands, and basically they are not totally aware about it. And of course, the access to the data and to the easy usage of those data is key, because as Jerome was underlining, having the load curve every 50 minutes is something that the expert might understand very quickly, but maybe the households are not very well about. So therefore, we have to make the user experience as easy as possible. In this respect, the streamlining of legislative and regulatory framework can help a lot to make it possible to do that. And from legislative side, from the system operator side, as Damien was underlining, we have to keep hardly working on developing flexibility services. Everywhere in Europe, there are many pilot projects, and ENTSO-E, together with the entity, must be sure that we are really landing in a common framework where easy solution can be applied to every single corner of Europe. Even from the supplier side, of course, once the technology and the smart grid infrastructure make it payable, the possibility to develop flexibility services and dynamic price offers, this kind of solution and product must be used and must be made available to the customer. Distributed flexibility has to be read together with distributed generation. The 2 points are not segregated, because to the extent that we are fostering, and we can do, because the press signal are giving us this kind of evidence, that we can favor the development of solar small power, wind small power everywhere in Europe, together with the possibility to have, through the aggregators or directly from the prosumers, the usage of flexibility. I think that in very few years we can bring 300 million European customers exactly in the direction to unlocking their power.
Thank you, Mr. Ranieri. And thank all the panelists for a really good and lively discussion. So if I could actually summarize very quickly the takeaway, and it's very difficult because we touched a number of different items today, but the first key takeaway for me is the energy citizen is critical to the energy transition, and we must enable their participation, and their contribution must be as easy as possible and must be valued for the services that we need to support the system into the future and support that transition that we actually need to make over the next period in time. And we also must make the right signals coming out from the market so that the right technology and investment, and make it easy for the energy citizen to actually come along and have those that investment. So make it user friendly, for a better word. And the power system must be flexible into the future to support that energy transition. And the recent surge on electricity price shows the over-reliance on fossil fuel peaking units, where demand side response could actually assist us if we could actually get some of those signals actually out as well. And the final point I would like to actually make is that I think also we need to look at how the market actually evolves to make sure that the valuable resources at the distribution system and their flexibility when needed can be accessible in the most effective and efficient manner. So I think they're the main takeaway points that we actually had. And I would like to thank Mr. Ranieri again, the panelists, and of course you, the audience, for making this a very interacting and interesting session. Thank you very much all.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you to Mr. Ranieri and all the panelists in this very interesting session. Liam, for sure, the takeaway for me is that the citizen is at the center. And I suppose as a citizen myself, I couldn't agree more. So with further ado, we're at the final stages of our conference. I hope you have enjoyed it. And now we turn to Joachim back on stage. Joachim, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
I'm very much interested in your views on our poll. So in terms of the outcome of the poll, maybe you could announce the clear winner.
Yeah, the clear winner is the electrification of the transport industry, heating and cooling. And I think that goes without saying. You know, we are at the moment in a huge transition. More and more sectors will be electrified. I have figures in my head. You know, in Germany, where I come from, we have around 500 terawatt hours in electricity consumption, but 2,500 total energy consumption. That means only a fifth of the total consumption at the moment is electricity, and that will change. And you see it also, I think you all, the audience, think the electrification of transport industry, heating, cooling, will be a key driver for the transition, and I fully support that. Then we have the offshore development and hybrid AC and DC grids, where we talked very intensively about that, storage and batteries, climate change threats. That is also one big point. And then we go to prosumers, digitalization, and as far as we have here also the nuclear power renaissance.
So, very interesting, Joachim. It sounds like the future is electric. Would you agree?
I think this is a new song from Coldplay, isn't it?
Yes, it
Going
must
electric.
be Going electric. So maybe we could turn to Vision 2050 now.
Okay.
So clearly this is a new strategy, a new focus for ENTSO-E. Could you tell us a little bit more about Vision 2050? Thank you.
Yeah, of course I will do so. Try to get the messages short but crisp. What we did is already the Vision 2030, we developed it. I already told that. We did in the last 2 years a lot of webinars and also publications, starting 2019 by developing our Vision 2030. And in the 2030 vision, we did a kind of a new approach in forming a system of systems. You know, it's a system which is combined of different smaller systems combined to a new overall system which goes to a more way of renewables and dispersed generation, but also paving the way for a further climate neutrality in 2030.
And in terms of the need to develop it, what was the impetus for making this happen?
I think the impetus is clear now. We talked about that. There is a new program which is called Fit for 55 from the European Union, European Commission. We talked about the COP26 now, the initiatives. There's a lot of pressure going in there. And I think the aim, the objective is clear. We have to be climate neutral in a due time, and the way is, and the development is accelerating, and therefore the way is clear.
It sounds very ambitious, but concretely, how will it be developed?
Yeah, the development will be done for us, for ENTSO-E, by putting all the inputs together, which we got today from our panelists, from you, from the audience, building on the blocks which we have already done within the system Vision 2030. But let me add now one important point, which was also not covered within the poll, and that is system security. We briefly talked about that, and I, as long for decades director for system operation, have to remind you all now. 9 months ago, we had a huge, I would say, disturbance, or big disturbance in U.S., in America, in Texas, where after severe winter storms and cold temperatures, a lot of households, 4.5 million households, were without electricity. And at the end, we had more than 700 people dead due to that incident. So we have to look after system security. It's absolutely the basis for all. If we cannot grant system security, I think that will be the no-go for all of the citizens.
And that sounds like that will be a fundamental component within the vision, for sure. So, in terms of hearing about it next year, perhaps you could comment in terms of when we will hear more about the Vision 2050.
Of course, yeah. I think, first of all, we have to look for the building blocks for the vision of 2050. And the vision 2050 will contain, of course, things which we have already developed, as I said, but will also have new contents. And the new contents is what is with investments and infrastructure development, what is with the operation of the system 2050. It will be a very challenging one. What is with the energy system flexibility, which the last panel was about. And I think there are a lot of very good approaches here, which we will collect and put together. And at the end, what we also discussed is what can be the market designed for all these new technologies, for all the new prosumers, consumers, generators? Will we have still an energy-only market, or will there be something different? What is about the 70%, which we talked about in the first panel? So a lot of these things will be investigated and will be collected and will be discussed, will be analyzed. There will be challenges and opportunities, of course. I remember Bill Gates was asked now if he would be a young man, what would he done? You know, what will he do now if he would be now young? And he would say, I surely go to energy, because this is the most sexiest thing which he can do. And I'm fully convinced that he is right, you know, because energy transition is a kind of a mankind's task, and we are a part of that, and it's extremely attractive to work on that.
Thank you, Joachim. We look forward to further updates in our vision in 2022 of our vision for 2050. So I thank you again for today. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our conference. Again, many thanks to our key speakers, our moderators, our panelists from across Europe. Truly indeed a pan-European conference. I also want to thank the great team that we had today in ENTSO-E to deliver your conference. And also just to say to thank you for participating. Over 450 of you have participated today. We are delighted with your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future ENTSO-E event. Thank you and goodbye.